Hello everyone, this is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto stepped out of Minato's shadow, and became a legend with Itachi and Kushina, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up. And subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. Naruto's birth was marked with joy and all that came with it. He was, after all, the first child of the beloved Yondaime Hokage of Konoha, or famous known as Konoha's Yellow Flash. That wasn't what made him special. He was born as the heir of the prestigious Uzumaki clan. The clan with blood ties to the Senju ties and by some accounts to the Uchiha clan. Within days after his birth, before he could even say a single word, Uzumaki Naruto was already heralded, and proclaimed to the one who would succeed his father as Hokage. It was as such that for the first years of his life Naruto was the prince of Konoha by all accounts. A bit cliché for a beginning, but that is how the legend of Uzumaki Naruto began. Perhaps not the real beginning of his legend, but the start of his life. Yes, his legend began not so far away. The life of Uzumaki Naruto began 7 years before the Kyuubi attacked Konoha. He was birthed into the prestigious clan of the Uzumaki as its heir and the only child of Konoha's greatest hero, Namikaze Minato. Love and joy took turns in greeting the young Uzumaki from the day he was born. Everyone loved him. He was, after all, the beloved prince of Konoha. The hidden leaf wasn't ruled by monarchy, but yet the redhead was his highness more than anything. He was a celebrated crimson-head child who basked in the affections the leaf and even outsiders gave him. Perhaps if life had continued in that manner, his legend wouldn't have begun. Yes, he would have grown up as a spoiled child who got everything he wanted. From the moment he started registering words clearly, he had been always called with Sama. The respect of birth, not of achievements. It was all good while it lasted. They say that nothing ever lasts forever. Naruto thought this saying would never reveal its ugly literal face before him. But it did. Almost like a cliché sad story. The waves of joy disappeared in just one night. The terror and dread that ran rampant through that night removed all traces of the highness Naruto enjoyed. A sister was supposed to be a blessing. Yes, Naruto had been thrilled to know he was going to have a younger sibling. His parents were overjoyed as well. But the night became a cursed blessing when the sibling was born. Horrors occurred. Long story short, a mountain-tall beast ran rampant throughout the village. Destruction was left in its wake, and death was at large. The spoiled highness of Konoha had observed everything. He'd never been gripped with such dread in his short joyous life. But that day, he had seen destruction that followed the birth of his sister. Konoha was supposed to be celebrating, but instead, it had wept and mourned while the remnants of the night terrorized her villagers in nightmares. The destruction the young eyes had seen wasn't what started the legend of Uzumaki Naruto. No, events that followed started his legend. It wasn't even the fact that the Uzumaki clan became hated once it became known that it housed the Kyuubi. The fact that some people had tried sneaking into clan compounds searching for the beast, some of his clansmen had been killed in the process hadn't been the reason his legend started. Perhaps it had some affect. But it was where his story started. It was where the ugly face of misery masked the face of the young Uzumaki. The days of running through the parks playing catch with mother and father were gone. There was a new baby in the village. The love and joy that had colored his life became a memory. The villagers turned their attention to more pressing matters: their hatred for the Kyuubi, their pain and rebuilding. Overall, Naruto became invisible. Even as he walked through the village streets, people seemed to be ignoring him. Perhaps it was because he was the heir to the clan that contained the Kyuubi. The fact that he was Minato's son had been forgotten. Perhaps it was because he used Uzumaki rather than Namikaze. Possibilities were many, but the invisibility cloak that he wore since the mad rampage by the Kyuubi pushed Uzumaki Naruto towards the embrace of legend. The story begins. Uzumaki compound. The main house was bustling with activities as the clan members went in and out. The new baby was all that mattered these days. Her birth had been risky unlike his. There was also the fact that some of the Kyuubi's chakra resided in her. Naruto may have heard wrong. But those were just the whispers that bounced through the walls of the main house. Naruto strolled through the people and walked towards his mother's oversized room. It had been a month since the Kyuubi filled the village with dread, and ever since then, Kushina has been lying in bed with her blonde-haired daughter. The extraction of the Kyuubi had left her weakened, and resealing it had taken a lot from her. A normal person would have kicked the bucket. But Kushina was Uzumaki by blood. She wasn't normal. The villagers didn't know exactly what happened. All they believed was that their beloved Yondaime Hokage defeated the Kyuubi, and since it couldn't be killed, the Uzumaki sealed it inside their compound. There were ludicrous stories that said the Kyuubi was living inside the clan's shrine. Some said it was in the temple. Naruto followed the rumors thoroughly. They were quite amusing. But the clan didn't seem to care much about it. Their main concern was Kushina and her young child. Naruto hadn't been allowed to enter the room his mother was recovering within. He'd yet to even touch his little sister. Those old geezers who were perhaps touching at about a century of years didn't allow him. All he could do was watch from the entrance while his caretakers laid out the instructions that went through his ears. He could only make a few things. He never listened. It was Naruto-sama something. Naruto-sama, your studies. Naruto-sama, go to sleep. Naruto-sama, you shouldn't be here. It was all just noise. At times he wished he had a large bat to swat away the nuisances so he could have some peace of mind. Naruto-sama. Looking through the door, Naruto could see his mother playing with the month-year-old baby. All he could see from the baby was the blonde hair. She took after her father. Kushina should be fine by now, but the old geezers with hundreds of years in experience forbade her from leaving the room unless nature called. Naruto-sama. The senile elders had once played a very cruel joke on him when he wanted to forcefully walk into the room. They put on a barrier and told him to study it, and if is able to deactivate it, they would allow him to enter. It hadn't been funny. He was 7. He couldn't understand advanced work from a fuinjutsu expert. When those words had been said, Naruto hadn't bothered looking back. He had walked away from the door towards his room to do something useful, destroying some things he owned in anger. Uzumaki-sama. There was something in his ears, but Naruto couldn't really make it out. He was busy with his thoughts. Sometimes he just wished he could deactivate his hearing and become deaf. Perhaps he would apply to become deaf when it was convenient for him. Ouch! Naruto cried, placing his hands atop of his head, where he'd been hit. Naruto turned to the wrinkled face that was staring at him sternly. He smiled nervously. The advantages of being a child. If only he was dealing with normal people, he could leave free. But the people that surrounded him were beyond normal. Especially this old woman. Yet, trying didn't hurt him. Who knew? Perhaps one day those eyes would give in to the demands of the age. What did I say about coming here during day? The stern tone. It was piercing through the senses. It wasn't the kind that would go on the left ear and leave out of the right. Naruto found it bothersome. He couldn't ignore it like the other mumbling voices in the compound. How he wished he could find some way to be immune to it. If he found the formula, Minato would surely be the first person to try purchase the formula from him. The poor Hokage really suffered from this old geezer. It was almost sad seeing him shrink with each crushing word coming out of her mouth. Still, it wasn't sad enough for Naruto to pity the man. Perhaps some thought of him enjoyed watching someone being at the bitter end of Yoshino's sharp words. Sorry, Oba-san, Naruto said apologetically. Every day the desire to be in that room just grows stronger. Even if I were to get beat, I don't think I would stay away. His eyes turned to the room once again. A warm smile graced his lips. That is my mother, and my little sister. Wouldn't you wish to be closer to them? Yoshino sighed. Just hold on for another week, she said warmly. Now beat it. Your mother needs rest. When little Karen wakes up, she will be problematic. That was without question. The infant had the power to leave Kushina clueless on what to do to keep her quiet. Naruto sometimes felt sorry for his mother. He was sure he hadn't abused his mother as Karen was. The girl made his mother look like she was an amateur in raising up kids. Looking back at the obstacle in front of him, Naruto internally shook his head, shoving all the thoughts at the back of his head. Outwardly, Naruto nodded and turned away from the old woman. What do to? Around this time, when the days were still pleasant, full of love and joy, he would be hanging with his mother at the park, away from the senile geezers who made him suffer through learning fuinjutsu. Seriously, even his mother had to step in to shield him from the amount of knowledge being filled into his little head. Now that everyone was on their feet, securing the clan compound perimeters, he had free time to roam around without being tested. It was even more of a joy that the century-old woman didn't question him about his progress in Fuinjutsu. At times Naruto thought the woman was insanely obsessed with his advancement in the art. She had no problems in playing the cruel game in order to get him to learn. Well, he could go to his room and do a victory dance or just run about the village doing a victory lap since he wasn't questioned about something he has been avoiding to do since Karen was born. Naruto. Curses. Naruto turned around to face the old woman. Why did he even have such thoughts? He should have known that the woman had psychic abilities. The redhead smiled pleasantly, eyes closed. Oba-san, he said in a sweet and innocent tone. That normally worked like a charm on other people, but the woman had some resistance that was unbreakable. Hell, even the legendary puppy eyes were no effect to her. She just shrugged it off. Perhaps she had seen it too often to be fooled by it. Are you still continuing with your studies? There was only one right answer to the question, and Naruto wasn't going to offer one that would land him into trouble. Naturally, the young Uzumaki said, I wouldn't want to displease Oba-san by slacking off. Besides, as you always say, I must advance splendidly to make the clan proud. Yoshino's eyes thinned slightly as she scrutinized Naruto's expression. It felt as if the woman trying to peel off the mask on his face. But Naruto was confident enough to just keep smiling as he was. This was a good way to avoid being read. Naruto had learned the technique a year ago. Close your eyes and smile. That way he wouldn't feel as if he was staring at death and was being fed a truth serum when staring at the woman's eyes. I should hope so, there was an unsaid warning. Once Karen-chan is ready to see the sun, I will want to see what you have learned. Of course, if there is no improvement, there will be consequences. So much for leaving the warning unsaid. He could have had the bitter joy of creeping himself out thinking of what could be his punishment should he disappoint. Well, it was time to get back to the books again. Naruto didn't want to be locked in a room full of explosive tags and told to disarm them within an hour or they would explode. Thinking about that experience, Naruto couldn't help but shiver slightly. The senile old woman believed the best learning course was through pain. Well, she was right. He certainly worked fast when he was in danger. Naturally, he wouldn't willingly agree to such brutal methods. Even his beloved mother didn't agree to them. But of course, Yoshino seemed to have the upper hand in every argument. You won't be disappointed, Oba-san, Naruto said sweetly as he turned away. Some fresh air outside the clan compound would do. Perhaps he could go see his father. It was around lunch anyway. The man should be available for a chat. That decided, Naruto smiled contently, and marched towards the Hokage Tower to see his beloved father. The thought of seeing his father made the blood inside him flow freely and electrolytes poked there and there around his body. If there was anyone who understood, it was Minato. That loving father of his. The smile Naruto put on when he thought of his beloved father didn't deserve to be in this world. Yes, it was out of this world. He could as well be taken to heaven while riding the joys of the memories he had with his father. It wasn't just his father only, but his mother as well. Ah, how could he not love his mother like that as well? She was a delight. The silent treatment from the streets didn't bother Naruto as he flew towards his father's office. No, he didn't even notice it. The memory joys were pushing him like a monstrous wave. He couldn't see anything from the other side but the wave. Hokage office. When Naruto reached the office, he found his beloved father present. Oto-sama, the redhead greeted happily as he entered the office. Minato peeked through the mountain of papers that seemed to be holding a meeting on his desk. The Yondaime smiled at his son. The smile was weak. Even a 7-year-old Naruto could see that. It was very weak. Even gravity seemed to be pulling it down. Minato couldn't keep it for too long. Every second it seemed to fall off as if it was dozing off. The man was hardly home over the past month. Naruto couldn't really follow what was going on. But he just made bits about enemies being outside the village outskirts and dealing with the effects of the Kyuubi's mad rampage as well as the resentful villagers. It was tough, apparently. Still, seeing his beloved father like that made Naruto frown slightly. Obviously, even if he asked, the man wouldn't be able to go to the park with him. It was sad. All those happy thoughts just got buried 6 feet under even before Minato could say anything. Naruto. Minato said weakly. You caught me at a wrong time. The voice was weak. It was almost as if the man has been starved for days. His eyes were slightly unfocused. He wasn't getting much sleep. Naruto blamed being Hokage. If it wasn't because of this job, he would be having his father now. They couldn't even go to the ramen stand to enjoy lunch together with his mother as well. How things changed. If only that tragedy didn't happen. Things wouldn't have changed. Naruto pushed all the gloomy thoughts away. He chose to act as if he had suffered from a memory loss, having forgotten what his father had just said. When is your lunch, Otu-sama? Minato closed his eyes slightly as he tried to put on a strong mask on his face. I've already eaten, he said, still weakly. He wanted to strengthen his voice, but he couldn't. He was too worn out. Oh. The sadness and disappointment in Naruto's voice hit Minato like a cold slap. He couldn't disappoint his son like that. And so, he was quick to try to correct things. How about this? We will have lunch together, tomorrow. Ikaraku ramen. I'll get you as many bowls as you like, Minato offered, trying to appease his son. I'll even be back home for dinner today. Perhaps I'll take you to the Hokage monument thereafter. There have been disappointments of late. His father had once said he would come back for dinner. But when he came back home, he didn't even eat. He went straight to bed. And that wasn't the only time Minato had done so. Yet even so, Naruto smiled at his father. He would wait patiently for his father to come back home later on. This was his father. His beloved father. There was no reason to count the sins of the past. Naruto was cut off when the doors burst open. 2 geezers walked in side by side, their movements in sync. They didn't even spare him a glance. They just ignored his presence and went straight to his father. Minato. What are you still doing here? The feudal lord he waiting for you at the council chambers. Minato blinked. He'd forgotten about that. He looked at Naruto for a moment and sighed. He was going to disappoint his son, yet again. The boy had been forced to come here because he was hardly home these days. It couldn't be helped, but he seriously had to make some time for Naruto. He couldn't keep disappointing him. I'm sorry Naruto, but I have to go to a meeting right now, Minato said walking over to his son. He kneeled in front of the redhead and smiled sadly. I'll see you later, okay. Naruto pulled his father for a hug, and nodded. Enough of this. Koharu interrupted the moment. You can't make the daimyo wait for you. We don't want to displease him at this stage. That tone. It was commanding his beloved father to get away from him and rush over to meet this feudal lord. Of course he understood who the man was. He was a clan heir. Such knowledge was drilled into him when he started learning how to write. Even if he understood that, Naruto didn't like it one bit. It was as if those grumpy bastards didn't care about his time with his father. Naruto resented anyone who thought his beloved father was wasting time hanging around with him. He may be the Hokage, but he was still his father and Naruto believed that family should come first. Even when the current events liked to tease him saying otherwise, Naruto didn't waver from his belief. I'm sure he can understand, Minato said, separating from Naruto. Besides, if he decides not to support Konoha in this time, it will only weaken the Fire Country. There was a bit of nonchalance in Minato's tone. Perhaps it was because he understood that Konoha couldn't be forced to do anything by the daimyo and that without Konoha, the man couldn't boast about leading the strongest country. Konoha's strength was part of the parcel that made him powerful. The Sandaime may have played it safe, but Minato wasn't surely going to let anyone roll over him. The carelessness in the Yondaime's tone didn't please the 2 elders. Their eyes narrowed and they spoke in a dangerous tone. You better not take that kind of tone to the meeting. Now hurry up. Hiruzen is keeping him busy for now, Koharu finished up after Homura. We need funding to help rebuild after everything, and with Iwa and Kumo making a lot of noise, we can't afford to make troubles with the feudal lord. Hi, Minato said, seemingly all energetic for a bit. Family is important as well. You have your own families, and I have mine. Moments with my son are also important. Minato was smiling to his son by now. Naruto just warmed up to his father. If the elders didn't know it, he was also shooting them a look that clearly said, take that you old geezers. They thought they could take away his father like that. Suits them right. He is just a child. He doesn't understand anything. And you must know that the village comes first before anything. Minato refused to comment on that. He gave Naruto one last smile as he stood up. And all of a sudden it was weak again. It was as if the words coming from the old hag had just soaked up all the energy he'd received when they'd hugged. Although they didn't notice it, Naruto gave the elders a nasty look. I'll see you at home, Minato said before disappearing in a flash of yellow. With his father gone, Naruto had no reason to be here. But he couldn't leave with those two still in the office. He wanted nothing more than to glare at them and say something. But he couldn't think of anything appropriate to say. What are you still doing here? This isn't a place for children. It wasn't for old geezers either. They were too old to be giving orders. Other old people were at home taking care for their grandkids, telling them fairy tales and other unbelievable stories. But who was he to say? Naruto couldn't say anything. They would just point out that he was a child and it was better not to make any troubles. Still, his mother had taught him that he shouldn't allow himself to be bullied and that he should fight back. It was only fitting for the son of Kushina to be strong. And as heir of the Uzumaki clan, he couldn't afford to be seen as a weak child. This was bullying, right? They were picking up on him because he was a child. The woman shook her head. I don't even understand why he is still doing out in the streets. He should be in the academy like other kids. Well, one thing is for certain though, the days of playing prince are over. They were picking on him. Well, they were old people and they could be right. The joyous days were leaving him. All that was left was just a memory. Still, Naruto smiled innocently, eyes closed, head tilted to the right. Sorry. I'll go play along with other kids in the park. That was a lie. He didn't have any friends. The only friends he'd only made were his parents. He'd spent most of his time with his mother and being forced to study books and learning the proper manners and discipline. Naruto turned his way, still smiling, and ran along out of the office. Home was the destination. Night came quickly as the seconds ticked away. Naruto hadn't felt a thing. It hadn't felt like hours had gone by for the night to greet the village hidden in leaves with a cold breeze that forced most villagers into the comfort of their beloved homes. The excitement of waiting for his father had been a little too much. He couldn't help but wait. It was almost as if his body had been induced with a large sum of adrenaline. He wasn't all bubbly enough to be dancing around the main house like the child he was. He'd simply been wearing an eternal smile that couldn't be brushed off no matter what was said to him. It was even more so fine at this time of the night as most people who ran around this house were at their homes, spending time with their families. Tomorrow would be another day to return and work. The century-old geezer was the only one who stayed behind sometimes. This was her home too. She was also needed to take care of his mother and the sister he had yet to hold. At this time, Naruto could even do a victory dance around the old woman while she was sleeping. The woman was deaf to everything around her when she was sleeping. Hell, the house could crumble down to the ground and she wouldn't hear it. Naruto doubted if the woman hadn't been awake to handle things when Karen was being born, she would have probably slept the whole night unless she was woken up. The Uzumaki compound was the safest place to be in the village. Security measures had been increased when some villagers had been sneaking into the compound. Now, no one could enter the compound. Hell, not even Anbu could sneak in. It was on lockdown and the only way in was through the gate. Naruto-chan, a tired Kushina called out to Naruto, who was sitting at the living room, waiting patiently for his father. The TV wasn't even on. It was hardly anything to go by when the boy was waiting for his father. Ka-san, Naruto said, turning to his mother. She also had that tired smile about her. Karen had been crying tirelessly once again, and his mother had been struggling to keep hold of the baby. Naruto was sure he hadn't been such a bother to his mother as Karen was. He was sure he'd behaved and hadn't made his mother worn out trying to calm him and stop him from crying. Perhaps Karen was bothered by the Kyuubi's chakra inside of her. Not that he understood how it all affected her body and mind. The whispers were that things were under control and they could remove it from her safely. You look tired, Naruto said to his mother. Karen-chan is a handful, Kushina said as she sat down beside Naruto. The moment she sat down, her eyes closed. Have you eaten? Naruto shook his head. Oto-sama said he would come back for dinner. I'll eat when he comes back, the redhead said calmly. Kushina knew that trying to tell him to eat just in case Minato returns too late would be troublesome. It would require an effort. When Naruto didn't want to do something, he wouldn't do it. He was just as stubborn as she was. Of course, she wasn't happy with him starving himself. No mother would be happy to see that, especially when there was food available. There was even a possibility that Minato might return late at midnight, and by then, he would be too tired for anything. Things were just a bit troublesome and she couldn't ask Naruto to understand the situation. He was just a kid after all. You eat something hungry, Kushina murmured, eyes closed. She probably didn't hear how she sounded. You want tummy grapple. Naruto smiled sadly. Even if his stomach made a few complaints, he would tell it to shut down so that he could relax and wait patiently for his beloved father. He assured himself he wouldn't eat before his father came back, and that was what he was going to do. It didn't matter how long he had to wait. As long as his father came back to him, he would be at peace. The parents were always busy these days. When they were not doing anything, they were sleeping. It was a problem. It was beginning to make Naruto feel lonely. A part of him was being stripped away. And he didn't like it. The change was just too much. Even so, Naruto loved his parents. They'd given him the best moments in his short life. If anyone asked who his best friends were, it was Oto-sama and Ka-san. Even if Kushina fell asleep right next to him when she'd just gotten to him, he didn't feel troubled to run towards his room to get a blanket and put it over her. And he did so. Happily. And then waited for his father. And waited until he fell asleep. At around 11 p.m., Minato returned home. He found both mother and son sleeping on the couch. The son curled up like a cat. He must have been feeling cold. He didn't have anything on him like his mother. It didn't take a genius to figure out why Kushina had a blanket and why Naruto didn't have any. It left a bitter taste in Minato's mouth knowing that Naruto fell asleep in this place waiting for him. He wasn't just waiting. He had told his beloved son that he would return for dinner, and he hadn't. It wasn't the first time that he'd let his son down. He was tired, but the thought of disappointing his son gave him some energy to be mad at himself. How long before Naruto started doubting his word? If things continued like this, his son would stop believing him when he says he would be home. Not being trusted by your own child. That would be heartbreaking. Well, there was nothing he could do to solve at this time of the hour. First thing first, Minato removed the blanket on Kushina and put it on Naruto before picking up the mother of his children. He flashed away in blur of yellow. A few moments later he returned and gently picked up Naruto. Another flash of yellow and he was in the center of Naruto's room. He placed the redhead down the bed and hopped in himself. He wanted to stay just a little while with Naruto. Even though the was asleep. It meant something to him. Just being close to his son gave him some comfort. Naruto stirred slightly. "To-san," he mumbled slowly and in a sleepy tone. Minato smiled, pulling Naruto closer. "I'm sorry," that was all he could say. Naruto didn't respond. He'd gone back to sleep. Minato didn't say anything again either. He too fell asleep. The following day, "Yo," Kakashi greeted, walking towards Naruto, who was sitting under a tree at the back of his house. Naruto looked up from his book. The first thing he noticed was Kakashi's smile. "You should teach me that smile, Kakashi. It's classic and I like it," the redhead said lightly to the Anbu. He was always looking to add to his arsenal. Getting that iconic smile would do wonders for him when one mask gets torn apart by someone. Kakashi sat down beside Naruto before he responded. "You have yours," he said. Naruto may not know, but that smile could be both scary and unreadable. It was sometimes scary because Naruto seemed to put it on in any situation. You could point a knife at the redhead's neck and tell him that you would slit his throat if he didn't tell what was needed, and the redhead would respond with that smile of his. Saying something like, "Really?" Of course, those who knew were aware that the smile was most often put to hide the true feelings. Perhaps it could be categorized as Naruto's fake smile, but it wasn't necessarily a fake smile. Those who didn't know may not notice it because he did it so sweetly with a bit of innocence. "I know, but would it hurt if we smiled the same every now and then?" Kakashi shrugged. "Yoshino-san still making you read every morning before you leave the compound?" Naruto nodded with a frown. "Saying I read while I didn't will only get me into trouble because I will still have to do tests, and I'm only going to suffer when I'm forced to demonstrate what I have learned. Naruto was beginning to think that the old woman liked to make him suffer. Perhaps he'd done something horrible unintentionally. Who knew? What was without question was that he really didn't enjoy spending time with Yoshino. Think of her made his muscles tense, and there was always the urge to either just dig hole and crawl inside or just smile pleasantly while praying to the gods to make her disappear from his head. No slacking off, huh? But it was only reading. As far as Kakashi was concerned, the redhead wasn't taught any other shinobi art other than fuinjutsu. They focused on art of sealing because it was a proud skill that Uzumaki possessed with great expertise than any other. They seal specialized in seals. No wonder they didn't bother with other arts. Then again, Naruto was still young. Things may be tense outside, but no one was forcing kids to be put into training so that they could be shipped to war as they were during the Third Shinobi World War. Kakashi hoped that things didn't go that far, but with how things were outside, anything was possible. Naruto was the Hokage's son. If things reached a boiling point, they would first look at him. He would be expected to fight as his father, leading by example. At least the boy had his mother. Kushina would tear apart anyone who comes up with the idea of sending her son to war at his age. There would be no reasoning with the woman. No. Slack off and you get punished for it. Even if nobody is watching, the actions will always expose the innocent lies, Naruto said, shaking his head. You're not doing missions today. I'm on guard duty for the next 3 months, Kakashi said. It was sort of his time off because he'd been working tirelessly when Kushina was pregnant and over the past month. His sensei had granted him the time to relax away from the battles outside the village and being on 24/7 guard duty. He only had to work some shifts now. So, you'll have more time then. Not that it will matter, Naruto said with a sigh. It was really difficult to get in touch with the Anbu even when he was free. Kakashi hardly ever came around to hang out. It made even his young mind curious. So, I'd come to see your mother, Kakashi said. I'm going to be spending some time here watching over your little sister. You know, since those incidents, non-clan members aren't really welcomed into the clan compound. Could his people be blamed for doing so? The whole village thought the Biju that nearly destroyed their beloved village was being worshipped inside the compound and came in here to try to slay it. The thought that they could worship such a creature was ridiculous. No one tried to say otherwise though, not from the clan. Minato had tired to say something, and only succeeded in calming his people from doing stupid things. But the Uzumakis have kept their distance and their silence. They chose not to involve in themselves in petty conflicts with the villagers. Hell, the fact that they thought the Biju was inside their shrine was because the clan had decided it wasn't worth telling them who the Biju was sealed into. It was decided that it should be kept a secret. And as far as Naruto knew, even the village council didn't know. That century-old woman had simply told them that the Kyuubi was their burden since it came to Konoha, and unless they planned to use the Biju as a weapon then they didn't need to know. But of course there was the punchline that if that were the case, those clan members would have to volunteer one of their children to become the host weapon and the Uzumaki would willingly ensure the sealing was a success. It was allowing the council to know who the Biju was sealed into that led to the information leaking out, so they didn't have much of a say. How are things? Naruto looked into the sky for a few moments. Okay. I guess, he said. Kakashi raised an eyebrow in response. Really? He thought. Well, he hadn't been told that Naruto was down lately, but things had definitely changed and they weren't going to get better. This was why he was even here in the first place. Then again, Naruto was just a kid. Perhaps he was choosing to ignore the glaring reality to keep his happiness. Since Naruto had been loved by the villagers, he doesn't receive some resentment from the villagers as most of the clan members do when they are outside the Uzumaki compound. It would be difficult to hate what they used to adore, especially without any proof of the redhead doing anything wrong. And so they chose to just pretend as if he was invisible. The redhead had yet to feel how damaging being ignored was, but he would soon enough. Kakashi was sure of it. He hoped then, the boy would be able to cope. Naruto-sama, a young lady called out from the back door. It's time for your history lessons. Naruto groaned. Once again, he wished he was both deaf and blind. He wouldn't need to learn these things. I wish I was 18 or Jonin already, he said, closing his book. What happens then? They said mother can only lead temporarily, and father can't be clan head despite marrying into the clan because he isn't Uzumaki by blood. So, when I reach that point, I will become head and will get to do whatever I want. No one will be saying Naruto you can't do this, Naruto you can't touch that, you can't go there. You're too young to know. Kakashi looked amused. The childish tone Naruto used was a befitting. Well, become Jonin quickly and you'll avoid all that. He meant it as a joke, but Naruto took it seriously. So, you became Jonin at a relatively young age. I can do it as well. I will ask my senseis about it and see what they say. You're not serious, are you? Naruto did his thing. He smiled, eyes closed, and head tilted to the right, who knows? As Naruto walked away, Kakashi shrugged. It's not like the redhead would actually do it. Not now. He couldn't become Jonin with just fuinjutsu skills. Naruto had no fighting skills whatsoever. So Kakashi wasn't worried. A week later. The week didn't go as fast as Naruto would have liked. It had gone as slow as a turtle running a marathon. There had been times he wished he knew where the one who controlled time hid the big red button that pushed time forward, just so the week could end already. But it had gone slowly. It had been a torture to his young mind and had made sleep more than he normally does. The only good thing that came out of sleeping was that he was able to avoid Yoshino and her scorpion tongue. His room was his holy ground. It wasn't a place where everyone went in as they pleased. Perhaps she'd even kept away from him because the final tests were being carried out around the house and the compound as a whole. The village was also getting a new look in terms of the fuinjutsu at work. Naruto had showed up for every meal. Things were difficult, but not so difficult enough for him to miss a meal. If he'd missed one, he would have been forced to eat. That senile old woman would have shoved the food down his throat. She wouldn't have problems feeding him like he was an infant. Throughout the week, Naruto hadn't seen his beloved father. That night his dear father had said he was sorry and that fell asleep in his bed, had been the last time he saw him. It bothered Naruto, more than he was willing to admit and more than he gave that sweet smile to anyone who asked if everything was alright. Naruto put away the disappointments of the week with blood-chilling excitement. His mother was finally going to be allowed to leave that room whenever she wanted and he would be able to hold his young sister. What more could he ask? There wasn't anything more than that. Especially when a little voice inside of him whispered that even his father may be able to get some time off from that demanding work and spend some time with his children. More family time. Naruto was excited for that. Ah. Kushina stretched out herself, breathing in the natural air outside the main house. I feel like taking a walk outside. She had been cooped up inside the house with nothing to do. The first 2 weeks were understandable. She had gone through the Kyuubi's extraction and then the Biju was resealed into her again. Normally, the extraction would have killed anyone. Only an Uzumaki could survive. Hell, not even those Uchiha, who held themselves as the most powerful clan in the village, couldn't survive something like that. The ordeal had left her worn out, and with little energy. She had recovered after 2 weeks and 3 more weeks were forced upon her. And who is going to look after Karen-chan while you're out? Yoshino questioned, in a demanding tone. I'm not going to take care of another one of your brats while you run around the village. Naruto was a handful enough. I will take her with me, Kushina said simply. That isn't going to happen. Not when things are that tense outside, Yoshino said sternly. We don't know what might happen if you go outside. They ignore Naruto, and show contempt to our clan. Karen shouldn't be exposed to such an environment. We won't know until Ijit out there, Kushina said with a shrug. Besides, Kakashi will be guarding me. Nothing will happen. I'm just going to the Uchiha compound to see Makoto-chan. As the words left her mouth, Kushina sent a dangerous look towards Yoshino, who was reminded that Kushina was just as stubborn as she was. You have to understand that we couldn't allow anyone inside the compound. Not even friends, Yoshino said a bit quickly. It won't be necessary for you to go there anyway. Makoto is coming here herself. At this time, Naruto stood at the doorway, watching the match between his beloved mother and the old hag. You didn't plan that so that I didn't go out, did you? Kushina questioned, walking towards Yoshino. Of course not, the old woman said quickly. Good, Kushina said with a smile. Because when Makoto comes here, I will walk her out of the compound and you won't stop me. You can try, but I doubt you'd be very successful. Naruto smiled inwardly. Ah, that was one way to win an argument with the old woman. The challenge of physical prowess. One thing was obvious, Kushina wasn't afraid to get physical with anyone. Come on, Naruto, Kushina said, pulling Naruto. They went into her oversized room, and she showed him Karen. Naruto just stood there, motionless. The baby was beautiful. It was the cutest thing he had ever seen. The little hands, the little fingers. Her eyes. They were just like his. The bright hair was obviously from their father. But it was no doubt it was his younger sister. Naruto felt a sudden wave of emotions flush over him. It was a bit overwhelming that he wanted to cry. But he held himself. He didn't want to cry in front of his younger sister. That would be wrong. What would happen if Karen cried as well? Who would his mother comfort first? The redhead looked at his smiling mother. Can I? Sure you can. Naruto leaned over and picked up the little girl. He was sure her eyes had looked at him curiously. She didn't recognize him. She had yet to see him after all. The little hands were raised up slightly as if she was trying to grab his face. Naruto gave the baby his finger and she took it with both hands. He played with her slightly and she giggled. The sound was a soft melody that just coursed through his entire body, and Naruto found himself giggling as well. This caused Kushina to laugh, but Naruto didn't look at his mother. He was in heaven. Let's go outside and wait for Makoto-chan, Kushina said to Naruto. The redhead didn't respond. He just turned around, Karen in both his hands. Held firmly, yet gently. Kushina just smiled. Perhaps she shouldn't have allowed them to deprive her son of this feeling. He seemed so happy, and oblivious to the world around him. Where do you think you're going? Whether Naruto heard that stern voice or not, it was up for debate. He didn't even so much as twitch. He just continued walking, playing with the baby. It was his beloved younger sister. Naruto. Now that was a mad dog growling. Curses. I told you that after a week, you would have to show me your progress. Now give Karen to your mother so we can go. Naruto looked at his mother pleadingly. Kushina was sure the old woman wouldn't back down and fighting this would only give Naruto more work. Besides, she wanted to have an adult conversation with Makoto. There was a lot she missed over the past month. I'll be back quickly. Promise, Kushina said, taking Karen from Naruto. Naruto hid his disappointment from his mother. It didn't matter if she would be back sooner or later. The fact is that he didn't want to leave with that old woman. He wanted to spend time with his beloved sister and his mother. Nothing else. And the fact that she was going to leave him in the hands of that senile sharp tongue was a disappointment. Where were the good days she used to shield him from most damages? She couldn't do it all the time, but there were days she tried, and even if he ended up being pulled to the torture chamber, he would know that she had tried, but failed because she was trying to push a mountain. Come on, Naruto. My legs aren't youthful as they used to be. Naruto smiled, turning towards the old woman. He was tempted to tell her to just lie down and crawl like a snake. He'd heard one of her grandkids telling her that when she had complained about her age. But he was certain it wouldn't end well for him. So, he settled for a smile and said, "Hi, Oba-san." Yoshino frowned at the smile on Naruto's face. It was becoming unnerving. She hoped it didn't turn into one of those twisted smiles soon. Wipe that smile off your face, she ordered. Whether Naruto was conscious of it was a question Yoshino begged to ask. Naruto didn't wipe it off. He just continued smiling in the same way he was and said, hi, in that innocent tone of his. Yoshino felt a cold chill run down her spine. Later that day, Uzumaki compound. Minato smiled warmly, holding his second child. This was the first time he was holding Karen outside of his bedroom. Things were always a bit difficult with everyone running around the house and Kushina being kept locked in that room. Well, it worked for the best. Nothing bad had happened to her and the young girl who looked almost like him, well by hair and eyes only. The difficult standing with the village made things a bit difficult for everyone, but things would proceed smoothly once he focuses his attention on the villagers. He wasn't going to allow the villagers to do as they pleased. Even other clan heads agreed that there was no justifiable reason for them to look at the Uzumaki with contempt and suspicion. For now, he was just happy to be home with his family. Where is Naruto? Minato asked Kushina, who was leaning against his right shoulder, sitting on the couch, in the sitting room. He is probably still with Oba-san, Kushina said. She frowned slightly. He is getting worked hard because of the responsibility that will fall on him once he grows. I wish they didn't take it too far though. You should talk to them, Minato said. I also want Naruto to have a normal childhood. Well, we did everything we could before this. We can't be blamed for not having being there for him. He had made time for his son and wife. Things were just different now, but he had raised Naruto as best as he could. Hell, he had even replaced himself with a clone during lunchtime to spend time with his son. Naruto was his son. He had a responsibility towards him as well. And he had fulfilled his duties as a kage and a father splendidly. Not of late though. That made him frown. Disappointed with himself even. The Uzumaki won't listen to me. But they will listen to you, Minato added. Kushina sighed. I will try to do something, she said a bit tiredly at the thought of facing off with that woman. At least he has learned necessities required for a clan heir and the so-called Prince of Konoha. That should be enough. Minato laughed at hearing Naruto's tittle. Prince of Konoha. Huh. Things have changed now. But I still hope I treat this one as they treated Naruto. He was sad and hopeful at the same time. Have I missed that much? Kushina asked, seeing the sad smile in Minato's face. The Yondaime Hokage nodded. Your clan and the Uchiha clan have become scapegoats for everything. Since they can't direct their hatred at the Kyuubi, because they can't see it, they are directing it at the Uzumaki clan. The Uchiha are suspected for being the ones that led it to the village. Although it is the Uzumaki who managed to reseal the Biju, you are being made to look like you're sheltering the Biju from harm. All I did was teleport the Biju away from the village, stopping it from destroying the village. You did the rest, but they seem only to see what I did as the only good. Kushina released a long breath. It's that bad, huh? Well, no wonder it was being kept away from me. But when I was walking through the streets, they didn't seem to hate me. In fact, most of them came up to me to see Karen-chan. I don't think we will have a problem with her. Minato smiled. That is at least good, he said. Naruto is being ignored though. I think they will like Karen because she carries my name. He paused for a moment. I hope that things will change soon enough. We can't live happily in such conditions. Kushina nodded. She turned to the door as she heard it open. A tired-looking Naruto entered the room. Both parents smiled, seeing the older child. Naruto, come and join us, Minato said happily. Kushina nodded, already holding out her hands to welcome Naruto. This will be the first time we all sit together as a family, she said excitedly. Naruto liked the idea as well. It was pleasant and just washed over all that tiredness he had in him. He wanted nothing more than to just run to his mother's arms. But he kept his cool. He wasn't about to act like a little boy in front of his younger sister. As Naruto walked towards his parents, Karen started to cry. That killed the mood. Both parents scrambled trying to make the baby stop crying. They appeared to be unsuccessful though as this went on for a couple of minutes. Minato just seemed clueless on what to do. Naruto just waited in the sideways until he decided to just excuse himself. All that tiredness he'd been feeling had returned at full force and then some. Even as he left the room, no one seemed to notice him. He understood Karen was crying. But that didn't make the negative emotions in him go away. He felt something as he climbed up the stairs, seeing both his parents become oblivious of his presence and make a fuss over the crying baby. Still, Naruto didn't let it bother him. He reasoned he was walking away because he was tired and it was his body pushing him towards his room, not the negative emotions he was feeling. That was the only thought that comforted him enough for him to have a good night's sleep. He hoped tomorrow would be different. But he'd been wrong. The day hadn't been any different. In fact, it seemed to have grown into a new ache inside his chest. He'd started it happily. That old woman had said he could take the day off because he'd impressed her with how far he'd gone with his fuinjutsu. She'd even said that he'd done more than she had expected given that his skills when he first began learning were mediocre at best. Naruto hadn't been insulted by those bluntly words slapped into his face. There was a secret that Yoshino didn't know. When those words slapped him, he rubbed them away from his conscience by thinking. How little she knew. It hadn't been that he had been pathetic in fuinjutsu. It was simple. He was just a kid and he liked to play rather than being stuck in itchy clothes while learning everything that could be known. Of course, the first thought was that if he sucked at Fuinjutsu, he would be able to get off the hard work and they would just leave him be as a useless brat who couldn't do something both his parents excelled in. That wouldn't have bothered Naruto. As long as he ran rampant in the park with his parents watching his every move, he would have enjoyed his life. But his little hopes were dashed when that old hag theorized it was just best to teach him the cruel way. That way, he would eventually learn. She thought her harsh lessons were proving to be productive, but it wasn't like that. Still, Naruto cursed himself for having made that choice. It has only landed him in more unnecessary pain. He hadn't bothered telling the truth, however. With the day off, Naruto had thought he would enjoy some time with his mother and little sister. His beloved father was out of the question because he always had to run off to work early in the morning. Those hopes were quickly dashed. It may have been morning for him, but he was much late than usual. The weariness of yesterday's night had made him sleep in and no one had bothered waking him up since it was his day off. Even so, what killed the happy thought was that both his parents were said to have left off early with Karen. Naruto might have been jealous, but it bothered him that his father was willing to make time for Karen but couldn't make it for him. What was worse, they'd left off without him. They didn't wake him up. They had breakfast and left him all alone. Perhaps he was being childish in feeling negative about it all. But who could complain? He was a child. He was supposed to have childish thoughts. The young Uzumaki took care of his body and filled up his gut before making his way out of the compound. He didn't go too far though. The atmosphere became all too apparent to him. Perhaps it was because he was feeling down. But what had apparently happened was that Minato had stood before everyone with Kushina and revealed his second child, his daughter Karen, who looked like him. They'd done it without him. Shouldn't he have been there with them to take a family photo? Shouldn't he have been the one to hold Karen as her brother? Naruto felt left out. The whispers in the streets didn't paint a better picture inside his head. Everyone in the streets was going all in all about how she was like her father, and how the other kid didn't look like Minato. The other kid. Apparently they were suffering from selective amnesia. They didn't recognize him even as he walked along the streets. Thinking deep about it, Naruto realized that he'd been wearing the invisibility cloak since the Kyuubi attacked. He'd just been ignorant of it to take to heart. But now it hurt. He didn't want to be invisible. Did these people think he might be the one carrying the Kyuubi? Did they just wish to ignore him because he was the heir of the clan that held the Kyuubi within its walls? With such questions and no answers, Naruto had cut his journey short and had returned to the home thinking it was his safe place. But the atmosphere there would prove to be as destructive as the one outside. The month that followed didn't change anything. The Uzumaki compound was fussing about Karen. Day in and day out. It was Karen this and Karen that. No one minded him. Hell, even his caretakers were now solely focused on taking care of Karen. His father's time in the house had become rare, but even if it was rare, he only spent time with his daughter. No one even came to his room to say good night. The senile geezer had said he shouldn't let things bother him because things were like this after he was born and that things would change. But days just piled up and nothing changed. Even if he tried telling himself that he should give Karen time to be loved as he was loved, the fact that his presence had seemingly become non-existent was tearing him apart in the insides. It felt as if he was living inside his own little bottle. It was like he was on his own inside Konoha. Worse of all, even at his own home. His life, his existence, his worth, it had all vanished. And he'd become unclothed, and no one took pity to clothe him. Naruto realized it then. All the fuss the villagers made about him during those good days weren't because he was great or they just loved him. No, it was all because of Minato. And now something new had replaced him. The fuss they'd made about him was like what they do about fashion. Now something new had popped up and they'd thrown him into the back of the wardrobe, never to be picked up again. There was also the fact that he hadn't inherited that blonde hair from his father. Outrageous rumors flew about, but Naruto didn't care too much for it. The cold hard truth was that he was nothing. The fame had just been borrowed. He never deserved the fame in the first place. But he still deserved being visible inside the house he called home, or as it had become, the place he slept and the place that fed him. One thing was certain. If he wanted to become visible again, he would have to earn it. But one thing that made him bitter was the fact that he could no longer feel the love from his parents and he didn't have to earn their love and affection. They were his parents. They ought to be there. But now they were just present in the house. Nevertheless, didn't feel like his parents, but Karen's parents. No one questioned anything when things were free flowing like water does in a waterfall. People just enjoyed the free fall and basked in the warmth of the joys the days were showering them with. Thinking about bad things lead to people being called cynical. Perhaps Naruto was becoming like that, but it didn't matter much. No one was going to question him about it and no one was going to notice it. No one was close to him these days. He'd become a lone wolf of the Uzumaki clan. Questions had to be asked. It wasn't a bad thing. Then again, what did he know? He was just a brat. That was all what the adults said when he inquired about certain things. Yes, there were things children didn't have to know and things they couldn't possibly understood. It wasn't that Naruto wanted to know everything, he just hated it when the "you're just a brat" card was slapped on his face. What Naruto had come to understand with questions being asked about how things were going in life was that bad things didn't happen because one had done good. Good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good person. That was the cycle of life. It was interesting, curious even, yet questionable, so much so that Naruto wanted to meet the person who pushed these things in life to happen the way they do. Perhaps there really was a god. If so, Naruto wouldn't mind praying to this god. So long as his ways were blessed in turn. As Naruto looked down to the village from the Hokage monument, he saw the beautifully lit streets of the village hidden in leaves, full with activities from people of all kinds. The military police could be seen managing things from getting out of hand between loathsome drunkards and those hooligans who sought nothing but trouble. Minato had taught him how to observe the streets. He had been the one who showed him this beautiful place that intoxicated his lungs with a fresh air that just spelled nature and peace. Those had been the good days. Good days indeed. When he sat atop of this head, Naruto had felt like he was sitting atop of his beloved father's head, and now he was sitting atop of the Yondaime Hokage's head. That should feel wrong, but Naruto didn't feel anything wrong with it. There was just the masked bitterness about the situation and nothing else. These days, he often found himself climbing up here to get some fresh air and just be away from everything in the village. Up here, being alone, with no one to talk to, no one seeing him, just being invisible to the village, yet being able to witness most things happening in the village. It just reflected his daily life within the hidden leaf. How he wished things were. Naruto trailed off from his train of thoughts and looked behind him. There was a man, an old man. He wasn't fond of old people these days. They frustrated him to no end. If they weren't there to bother children, then their lives would be much better. The view is quite lively from here, the old man said, walking slowly towards him. His tone was just empty of all emotions. But that didn't weird Naruto out. It wasn't like the first time he'd heard someone speak like a zombie. If you say so, Naruto responded, looking back at the village. There was a slight shrug of indifference from his right shoulder, one that the old man noticed, but didn't say anything about it. Now where had he seen this old man before? Naruto thought deep. Ah, bingo. He'd seen him in the Hokage's office. He didn't remember what the man was saying, but he had been having a heated conversation with his father, and when the man left, he was left with the unquestionable impression that the Hokage didn't like the man. Being curious, he had asked. And although his father was stingy with the details, he had warned him. What was this man's name again? He couldn't remember. But he was sure it started with a D. Ah. He probably forgot because he didn't need to know the man. If it had been important, he wouldn't have forgotten. Why do you come here so often? Didn't you just say the view is quite lively? Danzo nearly frowned. Perhaps he should be smiling. But this wasn't going to run smoothly as he would like. The redhead didn't seem to have any interest in starting a conversation with him, if that indifference was anything to go by. The good thing was that he didn't seem to know who he was. I did. Danzo conceded. Uzumaki Naruto, I'd like to speak with you, somewhere private. Naruto shook his head. Mother said not to go anywhere private with strangers. So, I will have to decline. I won't hurt you if that is what you're afraid of, Danzo said quietly. I am one of the village elders and was one of the Sandame's teammates. I wouldn't wish any harm to the future of Konoha. Naruto just repeated what his mother told him. No matter how good it sounds, don't go and don't say yes. Just because it looks and smells like candy doesn't mean it is candy. Obviously, the child wasn't going to go with him unless he used force. But that wouldn't end well for him, especially with how things were in the village. The damned Hokage had made it difficult to move about, and one wrong move from him would end him in trouble. There was no Hiruzen to manipulate in that office now. Minato might be peace-minded like the Sandaime, but he didn't concede to pressure. You have become overlooked by the villagers. No one notices you anymore, and your parents don't love you anymore. The first is true, but then again, I never deserved the love in the first place. The second is false. My parents love me. There was defiance in Naruto's tone. Danzo liked it. He liked them this way. They all eventually broke, and he would pick up the pieces and shape them into his preferred image. If they so loved you, why are you sitting here alone? Why don't they take you to the park anymore? It's night time. Any loving parent would be concerned with the whereabouts of their children. Are you telling that even if your parents wouldn't notice that you didn't come back home, they still love and care for you? Danzo changed his tone. Don't be naive, child. Naruto didn't say anything, simply because he'd chosen to ignore what Danzo was saying and focus on his thoughts, and they were going like this. He seriously had to do something to change the situation that was facing him. He couldn't allow the situation to remain as it was. Certainly, getting some freedom would mean becoming 18. And then he would be clan head. But there was no way to cheat age. Unless there was some sort of time travel machine that could make him travel to the future, or a machine that could make him 18. Say, is there a way I can magically turn 18? Naruto asked. He seemed serious about his query. The fact surprised Danzo more than it should. Danzo blinked once. There was an urge for a second round, but he held himself. Did the child just ignore all that emphatically delivered speech for this stupid question? Those words he'd said had to have had an effect, because some of it was true, but the child hadn't reacted to it, almost as if he hadn't heard it. What was wrong with this kid? I guess there is none, Naruto said, seeing that Danzo wasn't going to answer him. Then it was becoming Jonin then. This was the quickest way. He didn't want to remain invisible. He wanted to become a light that would overshadow all other lights. He wanted to be spoken about by everyone, more than they spoke about the Yondaime Hokage. This was the only way he would become visible. Becoming Jonin would remove some of the limits that were placed on him. That was something worth looking forward to. He had to go to the academy though. This was the only way he could become a Jonin. Kakashi had gone through the academy first. All great shinobi attended the academy. It was his time. Have you thought about entering the academy? Danzo asked. Ah. Naruto yelped as if he'd been hit. Adults can really read minds. He cried, holding his head, trying to shield it from further penetration from the old man. So you have thought of it, Danzo said quietly. It won't teach you anything that will get you recognized. Those who have excelled in the academy have done so because they received training as well. I can give you that special training. Naruto turned to face Danzo, a curious look on his face. He then beamed up slightly. Danzo, he said a bit happily. I'm sorry, but father said not to do anything with you. He said you're a bad person. It was all said while the redhead had his perfect smile. Where is that father now? At least I'm here trying to offer you my help. Naruto's eyes opened slightly and his smile shrunk a bit. He looked behind Danzo and said, Oto-sama, what are you doing here? Danzo's neck nearly snapped as he twisted around. But when he looked, there was no one. There was no Minato behind him. It was a bluff, and as he turned around, Naruto was nowhere to be seen. He'd disappeared. Was he just ticked by a 7-year-old with selective hearing capabilities? That was honestly disappointing. Really, Danzo had never had such a failed first impression. The brat didn't seem interested in hearing what he was saying. There was no way he could have gone about it. The gaki was just impossible. How was he supposed to land a first good impression on someone who only heard what he wanted to hear? Well, he wasn't going to give up. It was back to the drawing board once again, and Danzo wouldn't fail unless there was outside interference. A brat who thought it was possible to magically turn 18 couldn't win in a battle against him. He had to admit, however, that the first round belonged to the brat. Uzumaki compound. Back in the uncomfortable main house within the lively Uzumaki compound, Naruto was in his own dining room, eating his dinner. It was already past dinner time, but who cared what time he ate? It wasn't like his parents were going to suddenly pop up out of nowhere and start questioning him about his eating habits and how he has been doing. So, he could do as he pleased. Naruto-sama, a polite caretaker called as she walked into his space. Perhaps the calling was simply to introduce herself as she was interrupting his meal time. Azumi didn't hide her surprise when Naruto responded just like that. She normally had to call his name multiple times before he could respond. Sometimes he didn't even bother responding. He just ignored her presence. This was the first time that he had responded on first calling. It was so much of a shock than a surprise that she just stood, staring at him. Naruto-sama, Azumi called, once again. This time a bit questionably. Her tone suggested she wasn't sure she was talking to the right person. Looking at that expression, Naruto couldn't fault her. He was hardly a likable person to people he found to be nuisances. He didn't care for it, nevertheless. He didn't like the attention anyway. Well, the attention being given to him because he was Minato's son anyway. It had been great those naive days, but now Naruto saw it as nothing but a curse covered in ramen noodles. Am I eating with my nose rather than my mouth? Naruto asked, just to get the teen to talk. Azumi quickly shook her head and opened her mouth, but no word came out. She closed it in her head to the side before her voice finally kicked in and she spoke. Your mother was asking for you. So, Azumi blinked. That was unexpected. She didn't have an immediate response to that kind of a careless response. How was she supposed to respond? She thought hard and finally said. She was worried. Oh, Naruto said, staring at his meal. He then looked at the teen before him. He blinked. He'd never really taken the time to really look at her appearance. She wasn't that old. That he knew. She was in her early teens, had long red hair, blue eyes, like most Uzumakis. She wore a simple long blue dress. Where is she? Sleeping, Azumi responded quickly. Figures, Naruto gave his own quick response. I have a few questions. Can you join me? I don't know, Azumi hesitated. I was supposed to have been home some time ago. I don't want Oba-san to worry about me. Then again, she is probably dead in her sleep. The last part was said in a whisper. Naruto smiled pleasantly. Please. He trailed off when her name couldn't come up to his head. Well, that was embarrassing. But he didn't stop smiling. He just turned it sheepish, and spoke in an apologetic smile. Sorry, I forgot your name. Azumi, the teen said. You didn't forget it. You just never learned it the day I was introduced to you. You have a habit of letting things pass through your ears when you don't want to hear them. Naruto just continued smiled. Guilty as charged, he said. So, Azumi, will you please sit with me? As you said, your Oba-san is probably asleep right now. You can afford to spare some time. Even so, I don't want to make it a habit of going back home later. I understand that, Naruto said pleasantly. But I need your help with something. How about this? I will listen to you as you tell me more about yourself after you have answered my questions. That sounds fair. No. It's fair enough, Azumi said, sitting across Naruto beside the small table. How can I be of service? What am I to you? Naruto asked, curiously. Azumi adopted a thoughtful look on her face, hands folded across her small bust. I'm like your guardian. I'm supposed to watch over you, ensure that you're well taken care of and that all your needs are taken care of. Who chose you? Your mother, Azumi said. Clan heirs are supposed to have guards with them at all times. But your mother didn't want you to have a shinobi visible with you all the time as that wouldn't make you free at all times to do what you wish. So instead, she chose me to look after you. I see, Naruto said pausing for a moment. Why haven't I seen you following me outside of the compound? You're not always by my side. Yes, you are there for my lessons, ensuring I eat and other things. But not always. I have other duties within the clan, Azumi said. Besides, when you go outside, I can't do much. I'm forced to remain here and wait for your return. I don't worry because I know nothing bad will happen. Lately, there has been a lot happening, so even I understand you need some fresh air outside. Naruto nodded, understanding. I don't have friends, and lately I've been feeling a lot lonely. My parents were my friends, but I don't have them anymore, so that part is starting to reveal itself. Why don't you make friends? Naruto shrugged. Will you be my friend, Azumi? I don't have anyone to talk to here and I'm afraid I will lose it if it continues to be so. The redhead smiled nervously. Sure. Why not? I'm here for you, Azumi said with a smile. Excellent, Naruto said, clapping his hands once. My terms are limited. For succession, either I become 18 or Jonin. 18 is out of the question. So the only option is Jonin. At that stage, I won't have to listen to that old hag. How do I become Jonin? Enter the academy, Azumi said. She then frowned. But in your case, unless you force it, they won't allow for it to happen. If you choose the path of the shinobi, the village will come first. You won't be always available for the clan as you will be doing missions. And for someone who is to be clan head, that is not an ideal situation. Naruto frowned. This would be a problem. It was either he got stuck serving Konoha or working for the clan. Both paths weren't so bad. He could still go his way regardless of the option he took. What he hated was the fact that these were lanes put up for him. It felt as if he was being blindsided into going through a direction. There was no such as true freedom, was there? I can go to the academy, learn what is needed to improve myself and become Jonin, and then we will deal with other matters. I realize there is no other way I can become Jonin without going through the academy first, Naruto said. That was what he would do. Why should I stay away from that old man named Danzo? Azumi blinked before speaking in a serious tone. He is a bad person. Very bad. Naruto tilted his head to the side. I assume so, he said. But what? If he is as bad as he sounds, then you must know something. As my guardian, you must be informed. Well, Danzo is not a secret. Some things are, but what I can tell you is that his people have been caught in the compound trying to break into our library, and he has been campaigning to have the Kyuubi given to him so he can tame it and make it his weapon. Azumi said. Oba-san can't stand him. She said he is evil and power hungry. Well, she is evil herself. She must be able to sense others in her wavelength, Naruto said with a smile, drawing a giggle from Azumi. That's about it. Academy is decided. So, Uzumaki Azumi, what do you do aside from this? While you're at it, you can tell me about yourself as promised. Azumi beamed up, but she didn't say anything about herself. I have a question. First, she said. I don't understand you. Can I be honest with you? Naruto nodded. You frustrate me, your ignorance to be precise. Your question. Naruto obviously saw no wrong with his ignorance. He was aware of it. Ah, never mind, Azumi said. There was a bit of frustration in her tone and she felt like pulling her hair. She had an idea he wouldn't listen anyway, and even if he does listen, he was going to offer a half-hearted response. I don't have to tell you about myself. You will learn, just as I have learned a few things about you. She stood up and offered a smile. Good night, Naruto-sama. Academy. The entrance to the academy wasn't anything spectacular or grand. It is just the normal thing that happens at every year beginning. Perhaps his entrance was just a little curious since the registration period was already over and the Shinobi Academy had started a month ago. But Naruto wasn't going to entertain any questions about his late entrance, even if he knew very well that he is abusing the privilege of being the Hokage's son. This was a matter in which felt no problems in using his father name to get what he wants. Well, it wasn't like most people were complaining anyway. Naruto arrived at his class, just in time. He hadn't made the effort of coming to class early just to be a good student. He had his reasons for coming here and it was to grow. Coming early didn't help in any matter. He had no desire to become the teacher's loved student or sulk up to anyone. The class was full. All eyes turned to the only redhead in the class. Naruto just walked in and went towards the man sitting behind the desk in front of the class and handed in his registration form. The man looked at him for a moment. A look of recognition went through before he smiled at him. Uzumaki Naruto, he said to the redhead in a light tone. Are Yondaime's son. I expect great thing from you. Your father was an excellent student during his days. You ought to follow his footsteps. On his first day, this was his welcome. Just wonderful. He thought the fact that he wasn't using Namikaze would shield him from these madness and it wasn't. He hated being reminded of this. He hated being told he had to be like his father. He hated that he had to hide the shadow of that man who no longer felt like a father to him. He was Uzumaki Naruto, not Minato's son. Couldn't they just see him as such? Even with these thoughts inside his head, Naruto smiled at the sensei, eyes closed. Naturally, he said lightly. The sensei stood up from behind his desk and walked up to the redhead, his hand on Naruto's left shoulder. There had been an urge from Naruto to say, "Get your hand off me," but he held himself. Okay, everyone, there was no need to tell the class to be quiet. Clam was already in class. She had walked in the moment the sensei walked up to Naruto. This is our new student, Uzumaki Naruto. Some of you may recognize him, and yes, he is the Yondaime Hokage's son. The reaction was certainly different from what Naruto expected from his new classmates. They really did recognize that he was there, unlike the adults. Yet he felt bitter because the only reason they were even acknowledging his presence was because he was the Yondaime Hokage's son. One thing that stood out of everything was the reaction of some girls. His form was stared at with these eyes he found curious. He didn't understand it all, but it was certainly not the eyes of hate. They seemed to like him and were whispering a few things, which he couldn't make off. He would have to ask Azumi what those eyes mean. Naruto flashed the girls a smile. His eyes weren't closed, and they just shone brightly, with a bit of his teeth out, and went on to take a sit at the back of his class. Once settled down, he looked back at the sensei, waiting for the class to start so that he could learn something useful. "Oh, Naruto, why don't you introduce yourself, and tell the whole class your dreams?" the sensei quickly said as if he'd forgotten to say that before he went to take his seat. Just great. Naruto didn't object. It was his first day in class after all. He certainly didn't want to make enemies with the sensei on his first day. This wasn't ideal, but it had to be done. It was apparently the way things were done and he had to abide by it. As sensei has already said, I am Uzumaki Naruto, from the Uzumaki clan, and my dream is to become the Godime Hokage after my father. That was believable enough. He wasn't just some random brat with big dreams that seemed unattainable. He was the Yondaime Hokage's son. Anything was possible, and he was sure that if he'd said anything less, the class and the sensei would have been disappointed, and Naruto gave them what they wanted to hear to avoid unnecessary questions. The perfect introduction. As expected, the sensei said. When those words reached his ears, Naruto was certain he wasn't going to like that man. He was becoming a source of frustrations, and Naruto was certain this would go on until he graduated from this place. When was that day coming? As Naruto sat down, he felt some piercing eyes staring at him, and he looked to the side of the class. Black hair, black eyes equal to Uchiha. Naruto was certain he was supposed to know who the Uchiha was, but he couldn't remember. Perhaps he had been playing deaf when he was being told. Oh well, he would know eventually. Given the kind of look he was being given, Naruto didn't bother smiling at those black eyes that were looking at him strangely. He looked for a second and looked the other way. What was that all about? Itachi wondered. Given how the redhead was flashing smiles around for everyone, he figured that he would also receive one. But that wasn't quite what happened. The young Uchiha was surprised. It wasn't just the lack of smile, but Naruto's tone as well. The young Uzumaki had merely stated what was expected of him to say. There was some detachment in the thought of succeeding his father as Hokage, and that made Itachi curious. He wasn't expecting the son of the Hokage to be like that. Still, this just made things all the more interesting. The redhead was clearly above average. Just from the way he carried himself in those moments, Itachi's trained eyes were able to see that the Uzumaki carried himself well. He wasn't like the other kids. 3 hours later. Okay class, we're going to the training grounds. Naruto had heard those words from the sensei with his mind occupied about other things. There wasn't anything so far being taught that he hadn't been taught already. He may not know all the answers, but he was sure those people back the home had taught him everything. The thing was that he had a tendency to play the ignorant card. Not every little information and knowledge being drilled into his head was necessary and important, and so Naruto was picky with what he chose to hear. He felt slightly relieved when the sensei said they could go to the training ground. This was the first time, and so he was happy to see how things would proceed within the training ground. The classes were a bore. And they weren't going to do anything to make that thought he'd first had about not getting along with his sensei change. Naruto-kun. Bah. Perhaps that man had been right. Well, this was still day one. There was a lot that could within the next couple of days. He had a mission here and he wouldn't leave until that mission was on track. As of now, he hadn't achieved anything. He had no skills whatsoever, so that was a problem in his quest to grow. Naruto-kun. Was it just him? Was there someone calling him? A tug on his left shoulder caused Naruto to halt in his movements, falling back from the class towards the academy training grounds. When he looked back, he saw 3 girls behind him, faces red. He couldn't hope to begin to guess what was going on in their heads. Naruto-kun. Yes. Naruto responded in a welcoming tone. Well, his mother had taught him to be nice to girls. She said always treat a girl with care and don't bully them. Well, unless they wanted to do that to you. But he was supposed to play nice to girls. He didn't understand the necessity of such a chore, but his mother had simply told him to do as he was told and that he would understand once he grew. Yeah, right. I was. That's how far Naruto listened before he looked elsewhere. He was getting left behind by the rest of his classmates. We're getting left behind, Naruto said to the girl, turning away from her. Why don't you say what you want as we walk? Of course he said that, but he wasn't really listening to what she was saying. He had a feeling it wasn't anything important and he just pretended to listen just so to keep appearance. He didn't want to be known as the cold and rude Uzumaki who ignored his classmates. Naruto didn't see the irony in his thoughts and what he was doing. Who cared anyway? The girl didn't seem to notice that he was just nodding, not really listening to her. The group arrived the training ground and the sensei stood out amongst the students. His smile was bright enough for everyone to see. Okay, before we start teaching you Academy Taijutsu, I want a demonstration. His eyes fell on Itachi, the top student. Itachi, why don't you come here? The black-haired obliged quietly. Who wants to take Itachi on? None of the boys wanted to take the Uchiha on. Naruto wasn't about to jump in the fray without knowing anything. There had to be a reason no one was volunteering to take on the Uchiha. From what he had observed so far, the silent Uchiha was probably the top student, and judging from his demeanor, he had no friends, but the girls seemed to spend all their attention towards him. Of course the Uchiha just ignored it all with a cool air. Naruto. Curses. Naruto smiled at his sensei. Yes, he knew what the man wanted, but he wasn't really looking forward to it. The reason was simple. He was afraid. He wasn't of Itachi or anything. He was afraid that he may disappoint. What happens then? All that hype that he'd gathered would be crushed. The unknown was really scary. His mind couldn't really guess how things would end out, and that scared him enough that he didn't want to take part in anything. Why don't you spar with Itachi? It's nothing serious. Your father must take some time to teach you. So show us what you can do. How little the man knew. Naruto frowned for a second. He hoped no one noticed it. That man hadn't taught him anything. Sure, he was his father had given him love and affection during those days, but there was nothing now and he hadn't spoken about training with him. Not that it would help. If the man was unable to spend 2 minutes with him at home, he wouldn't be able to spend an hour with him in the training ground. Since he was asked, Naruto didn't refuse. He walked towards the Uchiha, smiling. There were whispers amongst the students, all of which Naruto let pass through his ears as he didn't want to know what was being said. It was probably just gossip and annoying talk. Itachi, show Naruto the peace sign, the sensei ordered and the Uchiha did as told. Now hold it. Take your stance. And begin. As soon as he said begin, it was all over. Even Itachi was surprised. He had a look of surprise about him, and that was much emotion anyone in the class had ever seen from him. The stoic Uchiha had widened his eyes and looked shocked at how quickly it had ended. He wasn't the only one. Lame. Yondaime's son. PFT. So weak. Disappointing. Itachi-kun is the best. Naruto was on the ground on his butt. He couldn't ignore those whispers. He heard them loud and clear. But they didn't do much to his pride. Losing within a second. Uzumaki Naruto had pathetically lost without even fighting back. It may be a spar, but his loss was embarrassing. For someone who came with recommendations and all the glory of Minato's achievements. It had been an embarrassment. Even the sensei didn't hide his disappointment. It was obvious to him that Naruto couldn't fight. After everything he had said, and this was the best he could do. Pathetic. Naruto was furious with himself. How could he have lost like that? Sure, he hadn't received any training, but to be embarrassed on his first day in the academy. It got worse when other kids started laughing at how quickly it ended. Some even suggesting he was just a phony and asking if he was really the Yondaime Hokage's son, because there is no way if that were true he could have lost like that. The Uzumaki was torn. To be called a disappointment. An embarrassment. Worst of all, he was certain from now on, the other kids would be either poking fun at him or just ignoring him. There was nothing special about him. He was a loser. He wasn't even worthy to be called the son of Namikaze Minato. A weakling. Weak. Embarrassment. Disappointment. Nothing. Just behind the Yondaime's shadow. Those words bounced up and down inside Naruto's head, and for the first time in his life, Naruto lost his smile. He couldn't smile. He had been embarrassed. He wanted nothing more than to just run away from here and never come back. Yes, it didn't matter if he'd just joined today. He could just lock himself in the Uzumaki compound and hide from this. But the fact that only a cold shoulder was waiting for him at home, and the realization that nothing would change. And a thought did come. No one would be calling him the Yondaime's son now. No, he would simply become Naruto. And that was something that warmed up his heart. It brought back his smile. Restrained as it was still forced back into show. It was on that day that Naruto swore that he would never be humiliated like this again. He swore he would never lose like this again, and if it does happen, it would lead to his death. Okay, students. Go back to class. I'm going to have to cut this short, the sensei said in a firm tone. Everyone go back. Except for you, Naruto. The redhead remained on his butt as the sensei walked up to him and gave him his hand to help him stand up. Naruto took it and looked at the man curiously. I'm sorry for putting you through that. He didn't sound very apologetic despite his words. Clan children are privileged to be trained at home and have access to their clan's library. Itachi excels because he takes advantage of what is available to him. I thought the same would be for. Especially since you're more privileged than him. Naruto said nothing. There was something in that tone that he didn't like. I could send you home, but you can't blame anyone for that show, the man said firmly. Dust up yourself and follow me back to class. Naruto looked at the retreating man with a blank look on his face. Never, never, never again would he allow himself to be humiliated like that. Never again. Not in a million-year lifetime. Nobody was going to ever walk all over his pride again. Not the Yondaime, not the Uchiha, not the Hyuga, not anyone famed as the strongest shinobi. Hell, not even the fearsome Kyuubi. Right there and then, that promise to himself was the step that pushed him into the path of a legend. Later that day, as soon as Naruto stepped into the compound's large gates, he was welcomed by a stern-looking old woman who looked ready to devour him. Yoshino was looking at him with both disappointment and displeasure. It was almost scary that it forced Naruto to smile nervously, eyes closed, wondering what was wrong. Was it coming home late? Well, that didn't matter much. This was not the face he wanted to see after a frustrating day. The old hag was surely going to ruin it further, and Naruto didn't want that. It was just a pity he couldn't avoid it. Oba-san. Yoshino regarded him for a few moments. How pathetic. I heard you went to the academy and embarrassed our clan. I don't even remember allowing you to go there in the first place. Worst of all, you had to embarrass our clan in front of the whole village. What do you have to say for yourself? Did you think just because you are Minato's son you'll naturally be better than him? Don't fool yourself, you naive child. You're not even as good as your mother or father in Fuinjutsu. Your skills are just acceptable and you don't even know the proper taijutsu stance, and yet you have the guts to pick up a fight. I didn't pick up a fight. Naruto more or less shouted. He wasn't in a good mood right now. He didn't want to be Minato. He wanted to be Uzumaki Naruto. He understood that he was nothing. But that condensing tone was just hard to take in. Naruto hated it. It didn't make him feel the defensive urge to smile at the senile old hag. Are you raising your voice on me, Naruto? Yoshino asked in a low and dangerous tone. Isn't that obvious? Naruto wanted to snap, but he held himself. Sorry, he said. It was clear that he didn't mean it. He was merely saying it for the sake of it. She was accusing him of picking fights at the academy when it wasn't true. He'd simply been asked to do it and he did. It ended with humiliation, but he didn't start nor ask for it. Couldn't her head wrap around the idea? Perhaps he needed to spell it out for her to understand. She must have heard wrong. Her ears have been hearing things for far too long. They must be tired by now for all the work they've been doing in these past decades. You're the heir of the Uzumaki, and if the responsibility is too much for you or if you can't meet our expectations, we will replace you with Karen. Do you understand what I'm saying, Naruto? Whether she meant it or not, it was a question only she could answer. Naruto tilted his head to the side and put on his beloved mask. Crystal, he said. Yoshino was sure she must have been seeing things. But Naruto's eyes had been partially opened, and there was just some coldness that seeped out. It would be frightening for a brat to have such a look. Yoshino immediately shook off the thought as her eyes playing tricks on her. She merely said what she said to make the redhead work hard. But it seemed as if the boy had taken her seriously. Well, that will make him work hard. Good, Yoshino said, all smiling now and seemingly satisfied. If I hear a word of another embarrassment, you will be forbidden from going to the academy until you learn how to properly represent our clan. Do you understand? Naruto gave a subtle nod and Yoshino turned away. Slowly. It wasn't because it was intentional. She just couldn't walk fast. Old age. Naruto has been saying the woman was over a century old. Uzumaki Naruto straightened himself, smile washed away. There was no sign of it having been placed on his face, and his eyes were just blank. Never. Never ever again would he be beaten like that. Never ever again would he be humiliated. His worth, existence, it depended on. Naruto calmed his thoughts, and smiled before running past the old woman without a word said to her. Within a couple of minutes, he'd reached the main house. And he searched for Azumi until he found her, waiting for him. Naruto smiled at the teenage girl. Azumi-chan. He greeted happily. Naruto-sama, Azumi said with a smile. You're looking happy today. Did you enjoy your first day in the academy? He could have smiled and said it was miserable. But that would have scared his dear guardian. What sort of person says the day was miserable while smiling? Narcissist. Or perhaps a masochist. Naruto wasn't that kind of a person and so he lost his smile and showed how displeased and bitter he was. Humiliating. One word summed it all up. How? Azumi asked curiously. Naruto shrugged. A miserable story for another day, he said. Who is Uchiha Itachi? Azumi blinked. How can you not know, Naruto-sama? She shook her head. Your ignorance baffles me sometimes. Uchiha Itachi is the heir of the Uchiha clan. He is known as the light of the Uchiha and he is a genius prodigy. He is the best. Naruto frowned. Ignorance was truly a terrifying thing. But his motto had been ignorance is bliss. Would he change it? Maybe. Maybe not. And I'm the disgrace of the Uzumaki clan, Naruto said with all the bitterness he could muster. He was an embarrassment. The one who made the kids laugh while ridiculing him for how weak he was. No, you're not, Azumi said rather quickly. Naruto smiled at her attempts to console him. Do you what some kids even questioned if I was really Minato's son? Hell, I'm certain they are now telling their parents all about it and tomorrow as I walk towards that damned place, they will be looking down on me as if I'm some pathetic brat. There was a bitter smile still. Well, it's good they stripped my father's shadow away from me. I won't have to look at it. But my own shadow, Naruto said. What really happened? Azumi asked, all worried by now. You will find out eventually, Naruto said calmly. Why do some girls look at me with red faces while fidgeting? Azumi blinked and laughed nervously. Why is your face red? You're seeing things, Naruto-sama, Azumi said quickly as she composed herself. Are you not hungry? Do you need anything? You're not going to answer me. Oh well, it's nothing I won't know eventually. Besides, there are other important matters we must deal with. Where are my parents? Your father has yet to return. And last time I checked, your mother has yet to return since leaving earlier. She has been making up for all the time she spent locked up in the house. Naruto just nodded. Take me to the library. At this time. Why? I want to learn, Naruto simply said. I want to learn how to fight. I want to strengthen myself. It's good that you want to take your training and studies seriously, but we can do that tomorrow. You should go wash up, eat and rest. You seem like you had a long day, Azumi said with a smile. Naruto smiled pleasantly, his eyes radiating with pure innocence. He cut the distance between him and Azumi and took her right hand, gently. Azumi-chan, please. We won't take long, and in return, I will do things for you, things only that I can do. Azumi contemplated for a few moments before finally speaking. Fine, she said. But only because you want to learn and I want to see it so. Naruto's smile turned into a grin. You're the best, ya know. Azumi took it. Of course I am. I wasn't. I wouldn't have been selected to do this job, she said, now leading Naruto out of the main house. They walked for a few minutes and reached what was perhaps the largest building in the compound. Azumi did some hand seals before walking in, and she just told him to enter. Why don't I get to do hand seals? Azumi regarded the redhead for a moment before speaking. I'm not supposed to say, but there's a seal on you that makes it easy for you to go through most barriers within the compound. That's good to know, Naruto said, visibly struggling to contain his excitement. As he walked into the library, Naruto came to a halt. Is this really a library? Of course. Our clan has history dating back to centuries ago. We have recorded all the bloody battles between the Uchiha and Senju. And since the latter were our brethrens, we have some of their secrets in here as well, Azumi said. Everything you need to know about all shinobi arts is in here. Clan things are in ground zero. There sure is a lot of reading to be done, Naruto said in thought. How do I multitask? Isn't there a jutsu that lets you do that? I can't read what I need to know within this year. Azumi looked thoughtful for a few seconds before nodding to herself. Let's go to Senju Tobarama's section. There should be something there if I'm not mistaken. Senju Tobarama. Who is he? Really? Naruto-sama, Azumi said with a look on her face. The redhead just smiled. I'm just messing with you. Of course I know who he is. His face is on the Hokage monument. Second to the first, the young Uzumaki explained. That's obvious enough, Azumi said. There we are. I'm sure it was somewhere here. You have searched for it before. Not a question, but a statement. Naturally. I have too much work to do. Sometimes I need to just rest. But I was never able to learn it because it requires a lot of chakra which I didn't have. Sounds like something I will like, Naruto said smiling. Uchiha compound. The head of the Uchiha clan looked at his son with a smile. How he was proud to have such a son. Perhaps witnessing what he witnessed had been a blessing. He didn't regret his choice to take Itachi to the battlefield of a war. His son had learned and he was growing up to be something that he was very proud of. The whole clan was taking a new direction because of this genius he had birthed. He could only hope young Sasuke does follow the same path as his brother. I heard Minato's son came to the academy today, Fugaku said. He knew very well what he was talking about. Itachi nodded. Why do you say it like that? Phrasing it right would have been to say that he heard that the redhead had registered to the academy. Instead, his father had said it as if the Uzumaki had merely come to the academy to visit. Itachi was certain that the boy had registered and was going to be his classmate for the rest of the year. His father's statement only made him curious. Fugaku smiled at Itachi. Expect his son to be perceptive. He was indeed truly blessed. He wasn't supposed to be at the academy. Itachi's curiosity only grew. Naruto was meant to be just the son of the Uzumaki clan, Fugaku said. I don't know what made that stubborn old woman change her mind. Perhaps it was the current situation or she just realized she couldn't stop him. Did he force his way? He might have gone without telling anyone, Fugaku said with a smile. That was another interesting character, young Naruto. What is your impression of him? He is weak, physically at least. I beat him today. More like humiliated him, Itachi said with a frown. To be honest with himself, he had expected something of a challenge from the Yondaimi's son. How did he expect the son of a powerful man such as Konoha's Yellow Flash to be weak enough to be defeated without an effort? He hadn't even been trying and yet the redhead hadn't seen his movements. Fugaku didn't look concerned by that. In fact, he wasn't surprised by it. It seemed as if he had expected such a result. Naruto has never fought before. I assume that they have only been focused on teaching him Fuinjutsu. You have been training for a long time, but he hadn't fought in his life. Defeat was the only possible result. I suspected as much, Itachi said. Why? Fugaku shook his head. How did he take his defeat? Hard to tell, but he was shocked. He doesn't seem to hold a grudge against me though. Keep an eye on him, Fugaku said. He might be your competition to become Hokage. You understand our clan's position, right? Itachi nodded. I have been working with Minato to change things. We are making progress, but there is still some distrust. I can live with it. You are our hope. If you continue this way, you will be loved, you will be light, and that light will be shed upon us. Itachi nodded. He assumed his father was working with the Yondaime Hokage to restore some of the power that was stripped away from the clan by the previous council and before Minato became Hokage. Of course, this change brought a cheerful demeanor into his father. If there had been plans to take back power forcefully, they were laid to rest. What needed to be worked on was gaining the trust of the villagers. That was what he was supposed to do. And his father apparently had the intentions for him to become Hokage, fairly. The following day, Naruto-sama, Azumi said, shaking the redhead, trying to wake him up. They'd slept in the library. She shouldn't have allowed for it to happen. But she had fallen asleep while Naruto was still trying to practice the jutsu he'd been searching for. The young Uzumaki must have slept out of tiredness from all the work he was doing. It was okay for him to use chakra since they had taught him how to use it before he started trying Fuinjutsu. He learned theory before that, but practical work required the use of chakra, and given that Naruto started learning at a young age, they had to be careful so not to hurt his chakra system. Naruto murmured, his eyes slowly opening. He winced as he got up. It felt like he had received a beating from that senile old woman. His whole body hurt. Perhaps it was because of the fact that he had exhausted himself and slept on the cold floor. Is it morning already? Naruto asked. He couldn't tell the time while in the library. The place seemed to be cut off from the rest of the world. Azumi nodded. You should hurry up home and clean yourself before heading to the academy, she said a bit hurriedly. It wouldn't be a good work for her to allow him to ditch class. I'm not going today, Naruto said in a matter of fact. He got up on his feet and collected the scrolls on the floor. I start training today. I wish to first master the jutsu before anything so that I can get some work done by the end of the day. Just after he collected the scrolls, Azumi took them from him. You're going to the academy. You will do this after your classes. Naruto smiled, head to tilt to the side. Really? Yes, really, Azumi said firmly with a nod to emphasize. Naruto wasn't going to get into an argument. Really, he hated arguing about anything. Especially when he knew he wasn't going to win. And so he nodded. I will head home. You should do the same. You don't want that old hag to find you smelling with yesterday's clothes. I'm sure she will be pissed. Azumi shivered and ran off with the scrolls on her hands. Naruto frowned. I thought she would drop them off, but oh well, he shrugged and followed her towards the exit of the library. Once out, Naruto headed straight to his home. After washing up, he decided to get an hour once again in grasping his new jutsu. He could only make one stable clone after all those hours he spent learning it. So another hour would do him some good and he would send the clone to the academy to do his dirty work. An hour passed and Naruto went to the main kitchen to get something to eat. His food was usually prepared, but there was nothing there since Azumi had yet to get there. He hadn't found himself anywhere near the stove making himself something to eat. Naruto found his mother, eating by herself. She had a tired look about her. But she quickly masked it as she tried to smile at him. Good morning, Naruto, she greeted happily. It felt awkward just saying it. When was the last time she ever said that to her son? Thinking about it, she hadn't been seeing him around the house that often. Then again, she wasn't around that much herself. Still, it was wrong that she just felt somehow greeting her son. Mother, Naruto said quietly. That hurt. Naruto didn't respond to her like that. He was always lively around his beloved mother. What was wrong? Had she not been paying him enough attention? As of late, things have really become hectic, with assuming the clan head responsibilities, Karen and her life in general. Naruto didn't make things better because he wasn't usually available. Not that she blamed him for anything. Kushina's smile faltered at Naruto's flat response to her. He hadn't even bothered looking at her. He was looking around, probably for something to eat. She stood up. Sit down and I will make something for you, she offered. Naruto hesitated for a moment before nodding and he silently sat down. The minutes that followed were full of a toxic silence. It was just downright suffocating. So much that Naruto applauded himself for being able to sit through it. Perhaps it was because he was really hungry. There you go, Kushina said with a nervous smile as she handed Naruto his full plate. She knew he didn't hold back when it came to food. One of the reasons he was growing up quickly and healthy. Thank you, Naruto said in a quiet tone and begun to eat. Kushina didn't continue with her meal. She'd lost her appetite. So, she started, but had nothing further to say. You look tired, Naruto said without looking at his mother. I hardly slept last night. Karen has something. I don't know, but she hasn't been able to sleep recently. I can't sleep while she is still awake. When she is not crying, she can be too energetic. Leaving her alone would be a risk. Naruto simply nodded and went back to eat quietly. Once done, he thanked his mother for the food before saying something about Karen. I hope she gets well soon, he said with a small smile and walked away. There was so much more that Kushina wanted to say, but she couldn't. She didn't know how to say it. She wanted to call him to return so they could talk. She wanted to ask him to be available for lunch so that they could go to the park along with Karen. She wanted to teach him some things she hasn't like she used to do months ago. She wanted to be with her son. But all she could do was watch his back as he walked away from her, and she was certain she wouldn't see him again that day. Before he could completely disappear, Kushina pushed, Naruto. Yes, mother. Naruto responded, turning around to face his mother. Kushina wanted to tell him to have a good day. All she ended up saying was, I'm sorry. Naruto merely smiled. It was a sad smile, and walked away. As he reached the entrance, he found Azumi standing there with a blank look on her face, hands folded across her chest. Done already? What are you still doing here? We have been talking a lot over the past 2 days. Naruto said, walking past the teen. What is it? You were usually ignoring me, Azumi said, following the redhead. Her frown clearly indicated that it hadn't been a fun experience to be ignored by Naruto. It had been downright frustrating sometimes. Used to, Naruto corrected. But of course, if you say things I don't want to hear, I won't hear them, he added smiling. Azumi frowned. He then stopped. Where are my scrolls? Forgot them at home, Azumi said. So, you're not going to the academy and I can't drag you there, she said. Naruto nodded. My scrolls. I wish to disappear from here, he then smiled nervously. Can you also give me some money? I will need something to buy lunch later on. Don't you have any? Naruto shook his head. Have never needed it. My parents always gave me everything I wanted. Azumi shook her head. Tell me. She hesitated for a few moments before asking. Do you hate your parents? She dreaded a negative response. Certainly, she didn't want things to go that far. Kushina was a wonderful person. She was the one who instructed her to look after her son. It may not look like it, but it wasn't like she'd stopped caring about Naruto. There would never be a day that woman wouldn't care about her children. Never. Azumi believed so. Why do you think so? Well, the situation hasn't been ideal for you, Azumi said cautiously. I don't hate them. I could never. I'm disappointed. I'm bitter. I hate the current situation. I'm immensely displeased, but I don't hate them, Naruto said quietly. Despite everything, those people gave me everything before this. Despite everything, I still do depend on some lessons my mother gave me. However, he smiled sadly. I'm growing detached with all those memories. Azumi frowned. She really hoped things changed so soon. What about your sister? I have thought about it. If it wasn't for her, none of this would be happening. I would still be laughing with my mother. Naruto admitted that much. But no, I don't hate her. The rational part of me rationalizes that she is innocent and it isn't her fault. That may be true, but when was the last time you held her? He definitely had to try to learn taijutsu and a few things to complement it. He wanted to become Jonin as quickly as he could. He understood once he reached that point he would be an adult and he would step into the light. He could do things of his own and become recognized as Uzumaki Naruto, not the Yondaime's son. Starting today, he would learn what he could. He could push himself towards overshadowing the shadow that hides his existence. And with learning to fight, to be the best, he would never ever be humiliated again. Azumi frowned. He was ignoring her. I will go take your scrolls and the money, but I'm only lending it to you. I will be waiting, Naruto said after a few moments. A few days later, Hokage office. Minato looked up from his work as Fugaku walked up to him. He dropped everything knowing full well that whenever the man came to him, there was always some serious issues being dealt with. Minato always tried to handle it with care because he understood that the Uchiha offered much more to Konoha than people were willing to admit. The Uchiha made much of Konoha's military strength and Minato didn't underestimate that, nor did he have any lingering suspicious thoughts about them. It wasn't just what the Uchiha offered that made the fourth Hokage act cautiously. It was also the fact that he was a Kage and he was supposed to make sure that everything in the village was run accordingly and without injustice. Some people were paranoid when it came to the Uchiha. They said the clan was all too powerful and some of their actions were suspicious. But Minato wasn't worried. He had an understanding with the Uchiha and they had an understanding with him as the Hokage and someone who was on their side. You're early. That was the predictable startup he always says to the man when they have a meeting after their side talks. We have things to discuss, another predictable response from Fugaku. Minato waited until the man sat down before he responded. We always do. But at least we are making progress. That is something to be happy about, the Yondaime said with a small smile. Fugaku didn't share the smile, he just nodded. He understood that was all. I heard your son is in the academy as well. The man said nothing further just to study the fourth Hokage's reaction to the news. He is. Surprised me, Minato said honestly. He never spoke about being a shinobi. And that made Minato's heart feel something like pain and disappointment in himself. If he had been there, Naruto would have spoken to him about it before joined up. Have you spoken to him about it? Minato shook his head. No, he said. He is hardly home these days. So am I. From what I hear, is hardly at the compound. Azumi says he is alright. Probably sneaks off for some privacy. Perhaps, Fugaku said. I thought you'd have someone watching over him. I assume he goes off to train. You see, on his first day, he was soundly beaten. Humiliated is the right word. By my son. Minato frowned at the thought. It must have been hard on him, he said. I don't give him time as I used to, and with the fact that he is my son. The expectations are high. Fugaku nodded. If you have no problem, I can take him in. It will be good for the relationship between the Uchiha and the Uzumaki. Minato raised an eyebrow at this generous offer. Uchiha train non-Uchiha. That's something. I appreciate it, but let me talk to him first, and as a father, I want to be the one to help him. I know it sounds selfish. But, I understand, Fugaku said, quick to say before he changed the subject. Those senile old fools are still yapping about this and that. I thought you and the Sandaime had things under control. That is all they can do. They have no power whatsoever. The Sandaime is my only advisor and they no longer form the council. Their word carries little meaning, Minato said firmly. You wouldn't mind if I shut them up, would you? They are becoming annoying, Fugaku said, clearly displeased. What about Danzo? His pests continue to lurk around the shadows and they keep sniffing around my clan. I won't permit it for too long. Minato sighed. Danzo was a troublesome subject. That man never listened to anything, but the Sandaime insisted he keep him because of the current situation that Konoha was finding itself within. Still, even when the man knew he was only being tolerated, it didn't stop him from moving. I'll talk to him, Minato said. You can do anything you want to anyone you find trespassing in your space. That's acceptable. No. Fugaku nodded. I can live with that, he said before standing up. We should head to the chambers. My fellow head clans must be waiting for us to start the meeting. Minato nodded and the two walked out of his office and walked towards the council chambers. There would be a meeting with the clan heads. Minato had abolished the previous council as he deemed it ineffective and lacking in many ways. The old people were senile and were making decisions that would lead to a rebellion. So he formed this group. He held most power as the Hokage and they couldn't usurp any decision he made. He was the Hokage after all and he was only obligated to listen to their voice. He could only choose which to take. But of course, for better cooperation, Minato always made sure he listened to them. The Yondaime Hokage took his seat at the center of the large table and greeted everyone with a small smile. I see no one is present again to represent the Uzumaki, Sum said in a flat tone. It's quite disappointing. Kushina was supposed to be present, but she must have been held up by something, Minato said. But it's okay since I'm here. I will be their ears. That won't be necessary, Yoshino said, walking into the chambers. She made herself comfortable, then. We have yet to fully agree on what to do with the Kyuubi, Hiashi said firmly, staring at the old woman. Not bothered by her stern mask. He could keep his own mask perfectly in shape as well. We have already had this discussion. My position has not changed and it will not change. Having another discussion will be a waste of time. Of which I do not have and will not sit to entertain, Yoshino responded flatly, staring into the eyes of the Hyuga. You're being unreasonable. Considering what happened, we can't afford to allow things to be run as they were before. We don't want another rampage happening, Hiashi argued. Are you doubting our work? Yoshino questioned in a low tone. I'm not, but I don't want to hear it. I have said it before. We will not trust the Kyuubi into the hands of Danzo. It is currently sealed and we can't extract it without causing the death of one of our clansmen. Yoshino looked around the table. Isn't the situation outside much more serious than this? Although he had his arguments, Hiashi frowned, knowing full that she was right. Fugaku nodded in agreement. I have to agree. The Kyuubi poses no threat at all. But Iwagakure and Kumo are real threats, and if we're not careful, they will be invading us. Combined they have 4 Jinchurikis. I'm not sure even we can survive that, especially with Kumo's numbers. There was silence as everyone got to think deep about what surrounded them. What have you been up to, Hokage-sama? Shikaku asked quietly. I spoke to the daimyo so that he can speak to his counterparts. Both the Raikage and Tsuchikage are unresponsive to requests for a meeting. I think as long as we keep it tight, and nothing major happens, they will retreat. How long though? It is becoming increasingly unsafe for our younger shinobi to leave the land of fire with those villages trying to provoke us, Inoichi offered his own thoughts. As long as we manage to control our shinobi, they won't do anything. We have 2 aces, Shikaku said, holding out 2 fingers with his right hand. The Uchiha and the Uzumaki. With these 2 clans, they won't do anything reckless. Their bijus can be rendered ineffective. Even so, we must strengthen our ties with other villages to make sure we have support in case something happens, Shuza said. Minato nodded. I've been in contact with the Yondaime Cage. They've recently had a biju problem and I dispatched a team of sealers to deal with it. Since then, we have been on contact on how to strengthen our ties. He understands our situation. And I believe we can count on them if anything does happen. What about Kiri? It is still on lockdown. We don't really know what is happening, but Jiraiya has been trying to get some information, Minato said. Internal security is still sharp. We haven't had any incidents. Eyes were narrowed at the Uchiha clan head, who showed no emotion whatsoever. I still insist that the Byakugan is more suitable for the job they are doing. Those bloodthirsty brutes should be outside. The Hyuga should handle internal security. Fugaku snorted. I don't appreciate you calling members of my clan that, all-seeing, Hyuga. Minato sighed, rubbing his head as the 2 clan heads once again offered some entertainment to the others with their bickering. Really, Hiashi could be childish at times. Fugaku wasn't better either. No one wanted to be outdone by the other. Minato cleared his throat to get everything back under control. After deliberating, I have come to a decision. The Uchiha clan will not be moved into the outskirts of the village. They will continue to stay at their preferred land. I understand that some of you have your thoughts about the matter, but this is a decision I have taken for the best of Konoha. Some of you may not like it, but please understand. If anything goes wrong, I will take responsibility. I have not made decisions that brought danger to the village and I will not start now. I hope you can trust my decision. Hiashi frowned. The Uchiha have much influence on what happens in the village, he said. They work with the Uzumaki, who also are in power. The Uzumaki were just fearsome. It was no wonder their former home were destroyed. It was no secret that they had seals that could switch off both the Sharingan and the Byakugan. Not mention they have seals all over the village. They could hold this village on a ransom at any day. But of course, that could just be the paranoia talking. You're welcome to take our jobs from us if you think you can do it, Hyuga, Yoshino said. If I remember correctly, you all agreed that each village would offer a service to the village based on its strength and expertise. Up to so far, we have not abused our power, nor have we at any time made any unreasonable demands. We have worked to ensure the village is safe. Are you perhaps complaining because your so-called all-seeing eyes can't look past our walls? Hiashi just stared at the woman. He had nothing to retort with. Fugaku also spoke his mind. You people seem to forget that the Uchiha is a founding clan. We founded this village along with the Senju. We betrayed our ancestor and chose to trust Hashirama and this village. But ever since, we have been dealt with nothing but mistrust, from both you and the villagers. What have we done to be placed in this situation? There was silence until it was broken by Shikaku. The Uchiha have always been powerful. That is without question. Just the thought of the Sharingan alone is enough to make enemies think otherwise. Perhaps the strict actions of the police force have made some villagers act hatefully, but you can change that by being a bit gentle in your duties you carry out so well, the Nara said calmly. I have no complaints as long as they don't start poking into my clan, Sum said, sending Fugaku a look. Let us just agree that what happens inside our clan compounds isn't anyone's business unless there is concrete proof of something treacherous, Yoshino suggested. Aren't you just saying that so that we stop questioning you about the fact that your clan has erected a barrier around your compound making it impossible for anyone to see what happens inside? Hiashi questioned. Must you always be difficult? Yoshino questioned. We wouldn't need to do that. The villagers were not trying to sneak into our clan. We have already lost our clansmen because of the villagers' stupidity and anger, and we haven't demanded the culprits be hanged because we'd like to keep the peace. If you really want to see inside our compound, you can make an appointment and you'll be given a tour. Does that soothe you, Hiashi? Hokage office. As soon as Minato walked into the office, he found the Sandaime waiting for him, sitting behind his desk. Upon seeing the active Hokage, the third tried to stand up to make way. I was just trying to feel the weight of this chair once more. Having held it for so long, I have grown used it. Even when I'm at home, I find myself missing it, Sarutobi said. Minato waved the old man off. Please, don't move, Sandaime-sama, the Yondaime said to his predecessor. He took the chair in front of the desk, knowing that the third wouldn't be here for far too long. You have really relinquished your seat amongst the clan heads, he added. Hiruzen merely smiled. I think I have grown too old to be involved. It's best I let them do things on their own. Besides, I'm still active assisting you, he said quietly. Minato nodded. I think we managed to dodge a bullet, he said. The others agreed. Not all of them, but they will understand eventually. Hiashi just lets his rivalry get the better of him. If Shikaku was able to understand, then there should be no worries. Perhaps next time you can address them, Minato suggested. The Sandaime shook his head. I will only get involved if you think you're failing or when they are taking things too far. For now, I will trust your leadership, the Sandaime said with confidence that Minato will get things solved. And Fugaku. Thankful. I have earned his trust and he has earned mine. I think he is also trying to form a relationship between the Uzumaki and the Uchiha that goes beyond duties. It won't happen now. Yoshino doesn't like the Uchihas. The Sandaime chuckled lightly with a shake of his head. Imagine if we'd allowed them to be pushed over and backed against a corner. They have always been prideful people and such extreme measures Danzo was pushing for would have driven them to feel like they are being pushed away from the village they helped build. Minato nodded. Knowing them, they would have revolted to gain what they feel deserves to be theirs. I feel though that they will never be satisfied if one of them doesn't become Hokage. My thoughts as well, the third said. Well, let us see how things play out now. With this out of the way, Fugaku should focus on his duties as the commander of the military police force and ensuring the village is kept safe. Hiruzen paused for a moment as he changed the subjects. How is Naruto-kun, anyway? I haven't been seeing him around here in months. Minato's deflated look said it all. The Sandaime Hokage stood up and walked up to Minato. He placed his right hand on Minato's right shoulder. Oh Minato, the third started sadly. Don't neglect your son. You will find out that trying to regain what is lost is not easy, especially when it comes to family. Be there for you son, talk to him, or you will regret it for the rest of your life. If Naruto forms a purpose and starts working towards it on his own, it won't be easy to get him back. You may never return things to what they were. There are people who will also try to get Naruto on their side and they will help him when you aren't. Minato smiled sadly. I may be too late. Naruto went to the academy without talking to me and I think goes all the way to avoid me. It's not too late, Minato-kun. It's not too late. You can still form a friendship with your son, but if Naruto doesn't want to, don't force things. Just keep an eye on him and let him know that if there is ever anything he wants or if he is in trouble, you as his father, will be there for him. Azumi walked towards a small water stream with a small bag on her right hand. As she looked on, she found Naruto floating above the stream of water. He was in a meditative pose, eyes closed, hands clasped together just below his chin. There were small orbs of water floating around him. There was another Naruto just beside the stream, sitting his self-made chair, made his chakra chains. He was also in a meditative position. There were small balls of crimson flames. Well, more like lava. Naruto called all these elemental chakra control exercises. He couldn't do jutsu now. He simply said he needed to learn how to control the elements at his disposal to be able to execute ninjutsu perfectly. Learning ninjutsu would come after he was satisfied with his control over both wind and fire elements. Azumi said nothing to the clones, knowing that Naruto never actually had himself to the kind of exercises unless the clones could execute it perfectly. She went across the small lake into a meeting of trees. Just past them, there was a small clearing that Naruto used as his training ground. The redhead only had his training pants on. There was a bandage covering his entire right hand along the shoulder. The redhead was standing atop of a chain that was tied to 2 trees, holding a kunai. Clones were hidden in the shadows of the trees, sending kunais, shurikens, and rocks towards him. Naruto had to block or dodge every projectile being sent towards him without falling. Mind you, he was standing atop of a chain without anything balance himself. There was no problem with being cut, but falling down was punishable by doing 10 laps, while upside down. Naruto-sama, Azumi called out to get the redhead's attention. You do know that you don't have to call me, Naruto said, deflected a shuriken. While we are inside the barrier, this entire field is my field of vision. He then jumped down and walked towards the teen. I know, but I'm trying to keep things normal, Azumi said, putting a towel down on the ground. She sat down and took out food from the bag she'd been holding. Breakfast is ready, she said with a smile. Thanks, Naruto said, sitting down across Azumi. Should you be using that hand? It has yet to fully heal. I'm not doing anything dangerous that will delay the healing, Naruto said with a shrug as he dug in on his food. Were you able to get what I wanted? Azumi shook her head. No, she said before explaining. All styles in our library don't fit your specific fighting style, and kenjutsu isn't the sort you can learn on your own, unless you're creating a new style. Why don't you ask your mother? It was hard enough getting her to tell me about the chakra chains, Naruto said with a frown on his face. He'd felt like he'd been emotionally blackmailing her. After everything she did for him, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Naruto understood that the only reason she'd told him was because she thought she could patch up some things. Refusing him had the potential to drive him further away from the main house. The woman had even been willing to give him some pointers on the Uzumaki ability. Naruto had been grateful, but that didn't change anything. I will have to get my clones to work harder to be able to see the flaws of my style, Naruto said. That was had been doing all along. Scrolls helped along the way, and with thousands of hours of training from his clones, there was a lot of experience to see the faults. Were you able to get me a sword that's tough enough to put up a fight against those chains? Azumi shook her head. There is nothing, unless you're looking for a special sword, she said. Why do you need a sword that is just as tough as your chains? A normal sword will be fine, depending on how you use it. Normal won't complement the strength of the chains. That will create an imbalance that I cannot withstand, Naruto said firmly. His head, thinking. The chakra chains are created because of our special chakra. I have failed in trying to use my chakra to create a sword as strong as the chains. It seems to be an impossible task for me. I have come up with a way to get around it though. What? When you leave here, go find me the perfect blacksmith in the village. Go ask if it's possible to create a chakra conducive blade with his strongest material and how much it will cost, Naruto said. Can you afford it? Mother gave me a lot money. Make sure that old hag doesn't find out. I'm close to telling her to shut her crappy mouth and go bury herself with the Shodai's wife, Naruto said with a frown. That wouldn't end well for you, Azumi said. All the more reasons to push myself to my limits every day, Naruto said tiredly. My body doesn't do much work. The mind does the work. For the past 6 months, I have had to live more than 10 lives. That technically means I have about 5 years worth of training, and 5 years worth of experiences. Makes my mind 12 years old. And that has its consequences, Azumi pointed out, to which Naruto nodded. That reminds me, we have to stock up more medicine for your headaches. There is a bag under bed, in my room. The money is there, the redhead said. If I was the Jinchuriki and a full-blood Jinchuriki, I would have inherited the super healing you all possess. Oh well, this will just have to do. Azumi nodded and got up. When are you going to talk to the people who've poking at the barrier? Naruto shrugged. When I feel like it. You assured me not even the Byakugan could see through it, and unless they brutally attacked it, it wouldn't break. I will trust that, and the nuisances can keep tossing and turning outside. Obliviousness has always been my hobby. Azumi sighed and took her bag. I will return with the result of my search. If it is good news, you will be able to go there yourself to have sword created. Naruto was no longer listening by then. His mind was already focused on his much-needed training. In his current state, he had yet to muster everything despite the 5 years worth of training. There were still a couple of months to go, and by then, he would have learned something to attack with. Defense was one aspect he couldn't live without. The reason he'd pathetically lost to Itachi was because he couldn't defend. If he knew how to defend, he could delay defeat and perhaps turn it into a win. Being a loser sucked. Naruto wanted to be a winner in life. Losers were laughed at and ridiculed, but winners were celebrated. Uzumaki Naruto had felt the bitter taste of losing, and it hadn't been good. He didn't want to taste it again. This was why training was his life now. Outside the barrier, Azumi came to halt as soon as she came out of the barrier that surrounded Naruto's space. There was a menace in front of her. The fact that the man in front of her was persistently pursuing Naruto didn't please her. She was Naruto's guardian, and she wasn't going to allow him to be dragged into this man's world. Still, she couldn't refute him face on. The man scared her. Well, not as much as a mad Naruto. The man still scared her nevertheless. What is Naruto really doing in there that he has to hide it? Danzo questioned, his lackeys flanking both his sides. Training, Azumi merely said. Obviously, Shimura, Danzo said, his eyes piercing into Azumi's. We have not been able to enter this barrier. Do you mind telling us to go through it? I can't, Azumi said. We have no problem in making you do it, Danzo said. There are a lot of dangerous animals in this forest that can make a person disappear. There is a warning that says enter at your own risk. The man just threatened to kill her. Azumi wanted to run back and tell Naruto. But she didn't. She stood her ground. The man was indeed a menace. Everyone was indeed right about him. She had been right not to tell Naruto about his visits to this site. Let me rephrase. Even if I tell you, it wouldn't make any difference. The barrier is designed so that only Naruto-sama and I can pass through it. Danzo nodded. I'd thought of that possibility. I have spoken to Naruto twice, and each time he doesn't appear to hear me. I wonder, if I held on you for a moment, would he listen and do what I say? Azumi did a Naruto smile. She didn't quite pull it off, but it was close and got the message through. You don't understand him, do you? Even if you hold me hostage, Naruto won't listen to you. He will only listen to you when he feels like it. I doubt he even cares that much about me to allow himself to be put into a losing position to save me. We won't know that until we try, now won't we? Danzo said calmly. Azumi nodded. Her heart was beating furiously. She thought she was even going to have a heart attack. Even so, she held out her hands, surrendering. Danzo nodded to his agents, who quickly went up to apprehend Azumi. She was brought before the War Hawk, and who ordered her to call the young Uzumaki. Azumi didn't object. She clasped her hands together and the barrier glowed twice. So you're the one who created this thing, Danzo said. You Uzumaki are truly blessed when it comes to Fuinjutsu. It doesn't seem like Naruto is blessed as the rest of you though. Azumi didn't respond. A minute later, Naruto stepped out of the barrier. Oh, Azumi, you're still here, the redhead said with his beloved expression masking his face. He tilted his head to the right as his mask turned to Danzo. Danzo-san, what can I do for you? Will you not reconsider my offer? I cannot respond to that as I have not heard your offer. Please be free to tell me about it on a good day. I'm currently busy right now, Naruto said, still smiling. He pointed at Azumi. If she did something bad, take her to my mother or the Hokage. They are the ones responsible for her. I'm just a kid, I can't do much, and if anybody asks, I didn't see anything. Having said that, the redhead turned around to leave, but before he could step into the barrier, one of Danzo's agents flashed in front of him. Danzo-sama is not yet done. That girl will die if you don't cooperate. Naruto's smile twitched, turning into a somewhat sinister smile. His eyes partially opened, coldness just oozing out freely. I'd be sad, but I'd get over it. Besides, if anything happens to her, you'll all be hunted down. I'm sure Mother wouldn't mind ripping every one of you apart with her indestructible chakra chains. He turned to Azumi. You don't have to return anymore. Go home. I will send a clone to do what I'd requested. Naruto then bowed. Gentlemen, on your way back, make sure the Super Anbu who watches me is taking nap. The redhead disappeared in a puff of smoke. Danzo blinked. That had been a clone. Earlier at the academy, Naruto strolled through the bright passages of the Shinobi Academy that had become so familiar to him that he could walk with his eyes closed. This was his daily routine, walking through the passages as he went in and out of the Shinobi Academy. It was a chore, but he still had to do it. If it was permitted, he'd have Azumi attend his classes for him. It was not enough that a clone was doing it, he still had to experience it when the clone dispels. He tried by all means to keep that air of nobility he had been forced to adopt in front of other children by that old hag who demanded that he act like the heir of the prestigious Uzumaki clan and the son of the Yondaime Hokage, instead of orphan. That damn old hag. It has been about 6 months since he first stepped into the gates of this place so that he could change and step outside the shadow of his father so that he could make a story of his own, be a light that wouldn't be ignored by anyone. But of course by light Naruto didn't mean he would be showering every human with kindness and purity, as if he was an angel of the good God. He had his own agenda and he had come to believe that even if there was a God, that God didn't like him very much. How many times had he prayed? There was not even a single response to his prayers, not a even damn sign. Naruto grew tired of doing so. The thought that there might be a God had disappeared in his head. And so Naruto had looked up with his beloved mask and given the God, who may or may not exist, his middle finger. He could do everything with his army of clones. Uzumaki Naruto didn't care for the kindness of a god. Yo, Naruto, a boy called from the behind. When you played the deaf card to Academy children, it wasn't nice. You only invited resentment and contempt. Naruto had received that during his first 3 months because he'd been ignoring them as he didn't want to talk to them or hear what they wanted to say to him. It was bound to be just nonsense and child talk. He had learned. Kids were quick to hate. No sooner than later he started having mobs chasing after for trying to act cool and like the tough guy because he had improved since his embarrassment on the first day at the academy. Naruto realized that being ignorant hadn't been worth the trouble. And so, he chose to play the other way around. Smile and talk to whoever called him. But of course, that didn't mean he listened to every crap being fed to his ears. Hello, he would have said the boy's name if he knew it. Seriously, Naruto hadn't known the name of his teacher for the first 2 months since no one called by that name. It was always sensei, and Naruto hadn't bothered asking because it was not a necessity. He was only keeping appearances at the academy to keep his grades and avoid suspension. Did you do your homework? The boy smiled, putting his right hand over Naruto's shoulder. If only he saw the eyes that looked at him the moment he did so, he would have just stopped talking and walked towards the class. Now, why would I want to do that when I can get to copy yours? That will depend on whether I want to give it to you or not, or whether I have written it. Naruto responded, matching the boy's smile. Ah, come on now, Naruto. I thought we were friends. Naruto took the hand that was hanging over his right shoulder. He did so carefully as if he was picking up dirt. Maybe. But I didn't bother writing because it doesn't reflect on my year mark. But of course, if you try to force things out, I can always write the wrong answers for you. The redhead said, smiling. You'd have to go home using a different route, the boy said. Or I'll just call the Anbu that watches over me to handle any threats, Naruto said and walked away from the boy. Sometimes he gave in, sometimes he didn't. He worked it like that. Although having mobs run after him was bothersome, bending over wasn't his style. He was not on the losing side after all, and his mother would be disappointed to know that he didn't face bullies head on. Naruto entered the class, immediately put on a charming smile. The girls waiting for Uzumaki-sama entered an imaginary world upon seeing the killer smile. Hello ladies, Naruto said walking by. The moment he passed the girls, he lost his smile and walked up towards his seat. Behind the redhead, words like, so beautiful, so cool. Naruto had realized that the secret to dealings with fangirls wasn't through ignoring them. Hell, even if you told them to go away, they would still come back. They had the same attitude as him, hearing only what was convenient to them. Faced with that, Naruto came up with the perfect strategy: smile at them and talk to them. That would just melt their little hearts and would be too satisfied to follow him. Once Naruto was on his seat, he turned off his ears and looked outside the window. The usual. Danzo had been right. The academy couldn't teach him anything. It was basically worthless. Well, in terms of training. For the name of Uzumaki Naruto, it wasn't useless. The kids were telling their beloved parents about how awesome and how cool the Yondaimi's son was. It was his own efforts that made them talk. But it didn't please Naruto that they still saw the Yondaime in his work. It infuriated him even. After all that he had put in, they still saw the shadow of Minato Namikaze, not Uzumaki Naruto. The teacher was always like, as expected of Yondaime-sama's son. If Naruto really paid attention to class, he would have already told the man go suck up to the Yondaime Hokage and leave him alone. Good morning, everyone, the sensei said as he walked into the class. There was a chorus greeting to the man. Did everyone write their math homework? Yes, sensei. The entire class. Well, it seemed that everyone had said so. The man smiled. It was somewhat of a devious smile. Is there anyone who didn't do their homework? No hand was raised. The man looked at Naruto and frowned. He looked at his beautiful class for a moment to get a happy memory. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto didn't look. There were words flowing inside his head in this form. There was only one competition in the class, and that was Uchiha Itachi. He was competition because he was the only who equaled his efforts. It wasn't that Naruto competed with the Uchiha. He didn't like getting involved in competition he didn't know he was going to win or not. If the result was obvious, he would have partaken in it already. The sensei didn't bother calling Naruto again. Takada, will you hit Naruto for me? The man asked nicely. When a punch was thrown at Naruto, the redhead caught it with his right hand, and turned around smiling. What is wrong, classmate San? He simply didn't know the name of the person in front of him. We have your attention now, Your Highness, the sensei said sarcastically. Really? He couldn't understand it. The boy was only rivaled by Itachi when it came to academics, but the boy's focus in class was non-existent. He completely ignored everything that went around and didn't even participate. He only answered when he was asked, and sometimes he wasn't even afraid to say, I wasn't listening. Okay. Now that I have everyone's attention, this is what is going to happen. The sensei's smile grew slightly. Bring out your homework books, and come to the door along with your books. Those who have done their homework will go to the training grounds with me, and those who did not will remain in class doing their homework. There was joy and complete shatter of some dreams when those words came out. Not fair, sensei, someone cried. What are you talking about? The man responded innocently. I asked if everyone had written their homework and everyone said they'd written. You shouldn't complain unless you were lying when you said you'd written. He paused for a moment, clasping his hands. Now my beloved students, follow me. This was the part that Naruto could follow. Some fresh air outside rather than being stuck in a pointless class that was nothing more than just time consuming. How Naruto wished he could be allowed to graduate yesterday so that wouldn't have to keep appearances in this manner. It was almost like torture. Oh well, it was not like it was only him suffering, the real him would suffer as well when he dispelled. Hey Naruto, you don't happen to have my homework, do you? Naruto didn't look. He had his hands inside his pockets, going down the front of the class, following other students. He could get some reading done. A part of his job wasn't just to keep appearances but to also get some reading done as well. It wouldn't be good to be ignorant of even the knowledge that would determine whether he passed the theory tests or not. Oh, come on. You don't even care about this. Why don't you just let me go and you'll remain here, alone, taking a nap or something? Training ground. The place had been his beloved holy ground. It was where he got his honor back. It was the place that made it possible for him to walk around the academy with his head held high without having to hear the snickers and snorts about his dismissal performance, if you can call it a performance against Uchiha Itachi. But then again, this was the place that had humiliated him and played ball with his pride. After months of determination and brutal work, he had regained what he'd lost by improving in the field. He'd worked hard to beat other kids in his class and improve the kunai throwing techniques and other things. His grades in class made it possible for him to be admired once again. The people who'd called him lame and a disappointment were now saying perhaps he'd lost because Itachi had caught him off guard. That wasn't true, but Naruto didn't go his way to correct them. They could think what they wanted. He didn't support it. He ignored the rumors and didn't delude himself into thinking that perhaps Itachi had just caught him off guard. Naruto, Itachi, would you two like to do an exhibition match before we start teaching those still lagging behind in the same taijutsu we have been doing since the year begun? The sensei said, looking at a few faces in particular. Itachi looked at Naruto. He didn't have a problem with it. But Naruto always turned down the chance to battle him. It made Itachi curious. Perhaps the loss had been too much for him and he couldn't face him again. Well, that had been the first thought, but Itachi came to realize that the redhead had other reasons, of which he couldn't figure out. Naruto held out both his hands in a defensive manner. I'd rather not, the redhead said with a smile. You can select someone else. There are other students who are good. Besides, Itachi and I aren't the only ones who've mastered the style. Well, he was right about that. There were students who had mastered the academy taijutsu, but the two were just above average. It would be something nice to have them fight, just so that other students could see what a real fight was, but Naruto always turned the opportunity down and he couldn't force him to do it. He couldn't use any cheap tricks to get the redhead to do it and Itachi wasn't the type to goad someone into battle. If he had the kind of heart, he would have done it already. But the sensei valued his morals and his code of conduct as a teacher and role model to his students. Surely if he did nasty tricks, the others would copy as well. Well, you're right about that, but are you sure? This will help you test how far you've come and if you can beat Itachi, the sensei offered sweetly. Naruto, come on, show us what you got. If you don't do this, there won't be the undisputed number one. Yay. Naruto still refused to do it. While the idea is appealing, I'm not that glory-seeking to be looking for number one. I'm fine with being second best. More words being just thrown out, Itachi thought. It was clear that the redhead didn't like being second best. He knew for a certain he didn't even like being in his father's shadows. He would seek to prove himself. Then this presented the best chance to prove that he could be as good as his father when he was still at the academy. Naruto didn't follow that thought. Why? While he couldn't mask his disappointment, the sensei sighed and looked at the silent Uchiha. He'd asked the Uchiha's opinion about Naruto's continued refusal to fight him again. It was just a sparring session and the sensei was sure that Naruto didn't have any grudge against the Uchiha and despite being the best two students, there wasn't some sort of a rivalry between the two. They just acknowledged each other and it ended there. Doesn't it bother you, Itachi-kun? The Uchiha shook his head. I have no complaints. If Naruto doesn't too, it's fine, he said quietly. Not helping, the sensei thought. Okay, he said looking back at his class. Itachi, Naruto, I'm leaving you in charge of the class. No kunais or shurikens unless you're being supervised. Those who are still lagging behind can practice now. I'm going back to class to check if those we left are doing their work. But if I return and find you goofing around, I will make you write tests every day, next week. That said, the man smiled and walked away. By now, Naruto was already under a tree, leaning against the tree's trunk. He then looked up as someone came up to him. The redhead smiled and turned to the person. If it had been anybody, he would have simply continued reading his book. Itachi-san. Itachi just stared at Naruto for a moment. Do you mind walking out of the academy with me, today? He'd said it just like that. Naruto didn't seem surprised by. In fact, the only noticeable reaction from the redhead was a widened smile. I don't mind, but I have plans today, Naruto said. Well, he couldn't actually say it wasn't his decision to make. The boss had to make that decision himself. But, tomorrow will be fine. Tomorrow then, Itachi said. He stood there for a moment before settling down beside Naruto. What are? Itachi-san. Come help here. The Uchiha sighed. Obviously, he didn't want to do it. But their sensei had commissioned him to supervise the other students. It was a responsibility. He would just have to follow through. Besides, they would just cut themselves if left alone. You're going to avoid your responsibility, again. Itachi said to Naruto. Naruto turned to his book. Yes. If you call babysitting them a responsibility one has to take seriously. Itachi shook his head and walked away. Later that day, Uchiha compound. Itachi was sitting at the back of his house, holding his beloved little brother. Oh, how he loved the brother of his. He couldn't wait for the days to move ahead so that he could teach the boy the things their father taught him. Fugaku always taught him whatever he wished to be taught. If he said he wanted to be taught jutsu, the man wouldn't say yes or no. The answer was always follow me. Perhaps it was because he knew that he would learn whatever that he was taught. Teaching him wasn't a waste of time. There was also the fact that being heir of the Uchiha clan and the acclaimed genius prodigy, he had his standards to uphold. His father would want him to continue doing great things so to improve the village's perception of their clan. Itachi had no problems with it. It benefited both his people and Konoha. Who wouldn't be satisfied with that deal? Little Sasuke wouldn't have taken much on his shoulders with him doing most things, and that made Itachi happy. Anything for his little brother. The Uchiha shut off his thoughts as his father came up to him. The man settled down beside him before speaking. I thought you'd be at the training ground, Fugaku said. That was what his son usually did anyway. I wanted to spend some time with Sasuke, Itachi replied quietly, smiling slightly at his little brother. Naruto had a younger sister. He wondered if the redhead shared a relationship similar to the one he has with his younger brother. He didn't know everything going on in Naruto's life, but he was curious. It was also hard to know as the Uzumaki were incredibly good at keeping things to themselves. But Itachi had never heard the redhead say anything about his sister. Not once. Even when someone asked, his response was usually a shrug or, just perfect. Fugaku nodded, accepting Itachi's response. How was the academy today? Interesting, Itachi said. Well, that really did sum it up. I spoke to Naruto and asked if we could take a walk together. He said tomorrow would be fine with a smile. Took you long enough, Fugaku said. I wish you'd grow acquainted with him. Given his development and his status, he will be good for you. And I want someone in the inside to help our clan out of the situation we are in. Itachi looked at his father for a moment. I thought everything was fine with the Hokage's decision to let us keep this land and still remain Konoha's security. That is just a step towards the right direction, and it has soothed many of us. As it stands, we are more equally or more in standing with other clans, but we remain less loved by the villagers. Fugaku said, taking a thoughtful look. The same can be said about the Uzumaki. Well, they have it worse, but don't seem to be too mindful about it. Unsurprising. They've always been a peaceful clan. Things can change in time, Itachi said. Though he liked the thought of the Uzumaki being peaceful, despite the fact that Naruto was nothing compared to peace. Becoming friends with Naruto will be a little difficult. I don't really understand him. He's complicated. Fugaku chuckled lightly. Not really, he said. People can bond by different means, Itachi. Some shinobi bond through a clash of swords, some through the shared ideals. Minato and I different people. Our ideals differ, yet we get along. Do you know why? Fugaku paused for a moment before answering his own question. Understanding. Try to get to know him and you'll find out. Itachi nodded. Oto-sama. Why does Naruto not compete with me? He goes his way to avoid even sparring with me when our sensei requests of it. I know he isn't afraid of me, and given his miraculous improvement, he can be match for me. Fugaku smiled. Because he uses the same technique you do. Shadow clone, the Uchiha had said. That is one reason. I also believe that young Naruto doesn't compete with you because his objective isn't being better than you. There is a bigger shadow than yours that he is glaring at. It is also possible that he doesn't engage in battles he doesn't know he will win or not. Itachi looked thoughtful for a moment before nodding slightly. That makes sense, but I guess I will have to ask him tomorrow. Perhaps we can become training partners, the Uchiha said. How frequent does he use shadow clones? Fugaku smiled. Every day, he said. From morning till evening. But you never know what he is actually training, but he trains every day. Only goes home to sleep. A few days ago, he was taken to the hospital with severe burns on his right hand. We handled his case, and he requested that his father does not know. Why? I don't know, Fugaku said. He had an idea, but Itachi could work things out on his own. His mother was a Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi when she was carrying him. I think it may have had some influence on him because the flames that burned him were not normal flames. That's the only thing I know that leads to believe that he is really training himself to his limits, and if you're not careful, he will surpass you. I won't let that happen. Good, Fugaku said. When you have become acquainted with Naruto, invite him over to the compound so that I can talk to him. The reason he burned himself is because he doesn't have someone experienced to supervise his training. Minato had said he wanted to speak to the redhead first, but it has been months and Fugaku wasn't going to wait for the Hokage to gather his courage to speak to his son. An opportunity was there, and it would be foolish of him to just let it pass. One like this would never appear once again. Fugaku stood up. I'll return late. I have work to do at Military Police HQ. Itachi understood he was being told to inform his mother should she ask why his father was returning late. Uzumaki compound. You've certainly taken a liking to your freedom, Yoshino said, walking over to Naruto who was sitting inside his little kitchen, eating his dinner alone. He'd just returned to the house after another day of work in the Forest of Death. Freedom is meant to be enjoyed, Naruto simply said. Really? He was feeling much older than he was. Call it the consequences of using a number of clones every day from morning till evening, only taking breaks to recover his chakra through meditation. Or is it perhaps wrong to enjoy this illusion? You're growing. That's good, Yoshino said, not bothering to offer Naruto a response to his question. Don't go to the academy tomorrow. Why? Although Naruto had nothing better to do at the academy and only his clone attended the classes, he wouldn't simply wish just to do so because the old hag was saying so. Oh, questioning me now, are we? Naruto didn't respond to that. He just continued to eat his meal as if the old hag hadn't said anything. The best choice with dealing with her wasn't to respond to anything she said. He was willing to play the ignorant card on her, so long as he could get away with it. The Hyugas will be here tomorrow to conduct business. You will be with your mother to negotiate whatever they want to negotiate with her. This will be part of your training on how to handle diplomatic missions. Did my mother request my presence? Wear something noble and don't embarrass the clan in front of those damn Hyugas, Yoshino said sternly. Do you understand me? Naruto was tempted to ignore the old hag as she had ignored him. But he wanted her to get away from his presence so that he could eat without troubles. I will be at my best behavior, Oba-san, the redhead said with a smile. Yoshino didn't respond, she merely turned around and tried to leave but halted when Naruto spoke. Remind me again. For me to become clan head, I'll either have to become Jonin or reach the age of 18, correct? Those are my only terms and nothing left behind. As far as I know, Yoshino said with a shrug. Don't think there will be a shortcut to it. You can't do anything as you are. It will take more years or being brutalized by Danzo for you to become Jonin quickly. But of course, get anywhere near that man and you'll lose all your privileges. Naruto looked at the senile old woman with a smile. If you keep using that against me so cheaply it will lose value quickly, he said. Besides, being head clan wasn't his top agenda. If he became Jonin, he would be free to do as he pleases without Yoshino sticking her nose into everything he did. I wouldn't be so sure about boy, Yoshino said sternly before walking away from Naruto. Azumi walked into the room and down across Naruto's small table. Naruto looked at her for a moment before looking at his food as he continued to eat in a leisurely pace. Does the old hag scare you that much that you don't want to cross paths with her? She can brutal sometimes, Azumi said quietly. She mostly blames me on your absence and lack of manners, as I am your guardian. So I'd rather avoid her when I can. Naruto nodded. Everyone would be most happy if the death god who forgot to take her soul remembers her, the redhead said, earning a look from Azumi, but he just shrugged. Are you well? Azumi nodded. But not thanks to you, Naruto-sama. He wouldn't have hurt you. He was just testing things. If he'd done anything, then preparations for his execution would have been in order, Naruto said. He then smiled warmly. But I'm glad you're okay. I was afraid you'd be shaken. If you really cared, you'd have made sure I was okay. Don't expect too much of me, Azumi-chan. Besides, if I'd showed I cared, he wouldn't have hesitated to do it again to get what he wants from me. The redhead paused for a moment. I also refuse to believe that you were that defenseless. Our clan may not be made of powerful shinobi, but killing us isn't easy and we are not defenseless, despite appearances. Azumi nodded. She knew that well. I didn't make things difficult because I knew you'd be that way. A thought did slip that perhaps you'd try to fight. That would have put you in danger and I would have fought. Getting into a fight you know you can't win is suicidal. I know I'm powerless, that's why I hide behind the mask. That's why I burn myself in training. I wish to change that, the redhead then smiled. When we have power, we will be able to look down on those who dared try to assert themselves on us. In any case, you don't have to come to me anymore. I will use other means to feed myself. Azumi nodded. Why aren't you shaken, though? Was it a small thing? Not at all. You were basically held for a ransom. I just made it look as if you were worth nothing to me, yet harming you would result in great danger. That man isn't rumored to be stupid. I knew he'd do the right thing. Naruto explained lightly. I won't have training tomorrow. I will take the chance to stock my weapons and get a sword made as well as rest my body. Saying that, Naruto stood up, leaving his plate on the table. Really? Naruto-sama, Azumi said. Naruto had already turned away. There was something in at the entrance that had him focused. His father. The man was smiling nervously as if he was trying to propose to a girl he liked. Really? He looked almost ready to fidget when the eyes of Uzumaki Naruto met with his. Otu-san. Naruto said, smiling at the Yondaime Hokage. Minato just continued with his nervous smile before speaking. Naruto. He trailed off, organizing his thoughts. How was day? Eventful, the redhead said. Okay. Silence struck again as Naruto just kept smiling at his father, waiting for him to say whatever it was that he wanted to say. I wanted to talk to you. But we will talk tomorrow after the meeting with the Hyuga. It was said a bit too quickly, but Naruto heard every word. The redhead nodded and looked back at Azumi with a different smile. Good night, Azumi-chan. Having said that, the redhead walked past his father. After Naruto left, Minato let loose of a long breath he didn't know he was even holding. He then looked at Azumi. How is he? Good. He is doing well in the academy. But you must know that already, Azumi said. Well, he was the Hokage after all, and it was he who controlled that academy. No doubt the senseis reported to him. Minato smiled weakly. Yay. Well, I'm glad he seems well. Thank you for everything. I haven't been much of a parent, but he has you. I'm just filling my responsibility, Yondaime-sama, Azumi said, just to play down her role. But she bit her lip when her words stung the Hokage. He also had a responsibility towards his son and he had been failing to deliver. Minato tried to get out of the situation by chuckling, awkwardly. At least some of us are, he said before saying thanks once more and walked away from the room. The following day, what can you do on your own, Naruto-sama? Azumi asked, delicately buttoning the noble cloak Naruto was wearing. Really, he couldn't even put on the damn thing nicely on his own. She had to do it for him. There were a few more things that he should be able to do for himself, but Azumi had to do it for him. Train, eat, bath, Naruto gave a list, though not too bothered by the question to even give it much of his thoughts. There were more pressing matters to deal with today. He was going to be suffocated sitting in the same space as the expressionless Hyugas. He hated the formalities that he would be forced to follow. Then again, his mother wasn't good at those either. At least there would be no that old hag to sulk out the living joy out of his lungs. That old woman was really something else. Naruto found himself often wondering when she would kick the bucket. Life would be good if she did so. When are you going to learn to other things yourself? What happens when you're alone? You can't live on your own because you can't even make the simplest of meals that other kids your age can do. Naruto waved his right hand. I do not need to worry about mundane things when you can do them. You're the guardian. I have to focus on the important things. Azumi stared. He'd said it like that. He said her work was mundane. How could he say it with a straight face and still just expect her to take it? Thinking of it, Azumi realized he probably didn't even care about her thoughts on that matter. He'd merely stated a fact in his opinion and that would stick. She sighed. My work is very important, she stressed. There, you look like a fine heir of the Uzumaki clan. I don't look like. I am the heir of the Uzumaki clan, Naruto corrected, though he didn't sound too pleased about it. He seemed to view it as a burden more than anything. But Azumi wasn't going to comment on that. I'm all done, Azumi said, stepping aside. Naruto looked at himself in the mirror. What's left? A smile. He smiled at himself. Perfect, he said. Sometimes I worry about your sanity, Azumi said, shaking her head. Who did that kind of thing? He was looking at his weird smile in the mirror and was calling it perfect. I will not see you until later. Have my reading materials prepared before I get back, Naruto said, walking away from Azumi. Azumi knew what Naruto said translated to that even if she does see him before he leaves the compound, he wasn't going to talk to her. She was going to be ignored. He was very good at pretending as if other people didn't exist or entering his own little world where it was just him dancing with his own unpleasant thoughts. Naruto left his room and walked towards the main living room. He was surprised to see both his parents waiting for him. It was not evident on his expression nevertheless. The redhead merely smiled at his parents as he greeted them. Oka-san, Tu-san, the redhead said. Hey, Naruto, Minato said with a nervous smile. You look nice. Did Azumi pick that for you? When Naruto nodded, Minato cut a short laugh. We probably spoiled you a little too much. Then again, you were our joy. Still are. The Yondaime Hokage was quick to correct himself. Naruto acted as if he hadn't heard the last statement from his father. He didn't respond to it. I wasn't expecting you to be present for the meeting. No more work overload these days. There is still work. This is part of work, Minato managed to say, feeling a bit unnerved by the look Naruto was giving him. It wasn't that of a scary face. It was a smile. But Minato knew there was nothing to smile about. Naruto shouldn't be smiling at him, but yet he was. I see. Then you're acting as the Yondaime Hokage, right now, Naruto said before walking past both his parents. I'll be outside. Once Naruto was out of sight, Minato turned to his wife. Well, that was disappointing. But not as bad as I expected it to go. What did you expect? Him to ignore me? He does that so well, Minato said with a sad smile. I'm happy that he is still able to talk. I did manage to make some time to be able to talk to him after the meeting. Kushina returned the sad smile. As long as Yoshino doesn't show up, everything should be fine. We will be able to talk to our son. I really do miss my son Minato. I want to have him in our lives once again. Minato pulled Kushina closer to him. We will try, Kushina, he said. Does Naruto not get along with Yoshino? Not at all, Kushina said with a shake of her head. You know how hard Yoshino is and Naruto likes things his way. He doesn't like being bossed around. I have seen how he smiles at her. It's unhealthy. Perhaps we should talk to her about backing off slightly from him, Minato suggested. He doubted that conversation would go so well though. That woman was seriously stubborn and Minato didn't like dealing with her. No need, Kushina said. From what I was able to gather, she has been staying away from him. She only goes to him when she has to. What makes it even so possible is that Naruto is hardly home these days. This has become a motel for him. Before Minato could respond, Naruto walked back into the room. They said the Hyugas have arrived, he said. Minato nodded. Come here, he said to Naruto. The redhead looked at his father questionably for a moment before obliging. The man touched his right shoulder and the three disappeared in a flash of yellow. They appeared at the clan gates where Hiashi and an old man were waiting for them. Kushina took the lead. Welcome to the Uzumaki compound, Hiashi-san, She only greeted the clan head respectfully. I'm sure you know our son, she added, pointing at Naruto. Hiashi didn't respond to the smile Kushina was giving him. His expression remained blank as he spoke. Yes, I'm quite aware of him. I have been hearing good reports about him from one my own, who is in a class with him. Naruto didn't hide his surprise at hearing those words. Not that Hiashi heard that he was doing rather well in the academy, but that there was a Hyuga in his class. For months he's been in that class and he honestly didn't know someone from the Hyuga clan was his classmate. Why the surprise? The old man beside Hiashi asked as the five made their way into the clan compound. Naruto smiled pleasantly as he responded. This is the first time I hear that there is a Hyuga in my class. I hadn't noticed. Hiashi seemed offended by that, but Naruto just added, not sounding very apologetic. But then again, I didn't know my sensei's name until just recently. He wanted to add something but he stopped, figuring it would only make the Hyuga mad. Hiashi faced the front. He hadn't liked how Naruto spoke. For someone who has garnered much attention as Uchiha Itachi, your attitude is disappointing. I'd expected you to know that. Ignorance is truly bliss to the young ones. Naruto actually nodded in agreement. Well said, he said. Perhaps my attitude is disappointing. I will apologize for that. I have a habit of ignoring trivial things and things that I have no use in knowing, he said that with his smile. Minato had to hold himself from laughing. Kids. It was obvious Naruto had merely said that because Hiashi had said Naruto was disappointing. It was amusing just to see Hiashi trying hard to make sure his mask didn't slip to that blow from his son. Nothing further was said as Hiashi didn't want to end up arguing with a child. It was even worse since both parents didn't seem like they were going to stop their son from talking to him in such a disrespectful manner. No child had ever spoken to him like that. It was disrespectful, but he kept his mouth shut because he'd come here for help and he was the one who started it, though he wouldn't admit that to anyone. The rest of the walk towards the main house was a silent one. Everyone was wrapped up in their thoughts with the Hyugas taking their time to look around the compound. It was a rare sight. No one outside the compound could actually see what was going on inside. The place appeared to be just like a forest because of the genjutsu-infused seal that surrounded the compound. The group made it towards the reception room, the room designed specifically for things such as this. Kushina sat at a small podium, uncomfortable. She didn't like sitting like this, but the others were used to this kind of thing since they regularly did it. Hiashi and his companion sat facing the Uzumaki woman with Minato and Naruto sitting on the sides, both facing each other. As part of his training and being that he is the heir of the clan, Naruto will only observe. He won't be saying anything, Kushina said quietly. The Hokage is here as per your request that he be a witness. Hiashi nodded, and looked at Minato. I hope you will be remaining neutral and fair, even though this might affect the future of your son, the Hyuga clan head said. Of course, Minato said with a nod. I will appreciate it, Hiashi said. There are a lot of things that have to be discussed and I truly hope that we will come to an agreement in some of them. I'm willing to compromise if that is needed for an agreement to be reached. The man paused for a moment. I have two questions before we can get to that. How deep is your relationship with the Uchiha and why is your library so warded with seals? I cannot answer the first, Kushina said, but the second is because it's our library and we have to protect it. Our library has things that you cannot even find in the village's library or anywhere else. It is our treasure. That was how far Naruto listened. Really, he could have simply gone to his training ground and learned some things. Oh wait, he didn't send a clone to do anything because he wanted to rest. Living so many lives was making his mind feel old. Really, he had so many experiences it now felt like he had so many years under his belt. He had other business to handle today. He needed to get his weapons created and there was a meeting with Itachi. His clone had said today, so he would have to go to the academy and meet the Uchiha. Perhaps he could gain something by associating with the Uchiha. Naruto. The redhead looked at his mother. There was no way he could ignore that chilling voice that was calling him. She must have noticed that he wasn't listening to everything. As he looked up to his mother, Naruto found the woman standing, her hands on her hips, staring at him. Naruto smiled. Yes, mother. That smile once again. Kushina steeled her nerves and spoke. Go wait for us in the main living room. We are just going to see Hiashi-san out. Naruto nodded. He hadn't heard anything that was being said when the negotiations were proceeding. Ah, ignorance was truly bliss. He wasn't even going to bother trying to figure out what was being said. If there was anything, his mother would deal with it. As Naruto sat down on the couch in the main living room, what was happening fully registered in his head. His parents were going to talk to him. It was perhaps the first time in months that both were going to sit with him. Naruto wasn't excited by it. It made him frown because he wasn't really looking forward to it. Time seemed to have just run fast as his parents had been quick to return. Perhaps Minato had just teleported both him and his mother back to the house. Naruto comforted himself in those thoughts as he looked at both his parents who sat across him, facing him. All of the sudden, there was an air of nervousness. It was disturbing and it really suffocated Naruto. He really didn't like being in this kind of atmosphere. Karen-chan asleep. The redhead started quietly. Kushina shook her head. She is with Azumi. I hope it doesn't end up being her job. I'm not sure I want to learn to know another guardian, Naruto said a bit too innocently. Kushina was quick to raise both her hands. Of course not. Azumi will always be there for you. She is yours alone. Glad to know, Naruto said and then gave both his parents a look that clearly said, so. Minato looked at Kushina for a moment before looking back at Naruto. We haven't really been parents to you. We want to change that. We want to make it up to you. But we first want to know, do you resent us? No, Naruto said with a shake of his head. I'm disappointed. Bitterly disappointed. Immensely disappointed, but I do not resent you. That said, the redhead stood up. But as he tried to leave, Kushina grabbed him. She gave him a pleading look. She was begging him to stay. It was the first time he was seeing her make such a look, but Naruto didn't want to stay. But he had an alternative that would suit them both. I will join you for dinner tonight, he said with a smile, then tilted his head to the side. As long as you show up. Both parents flinched when those words left his lips. Well, enjoy the rest of the day, mother, father. Naruto walked away. Kushina turned to Minato. If we mess up this time, we won't get another chance, she said. Minato nodded. I will be sure to return in time before dinner so we can prepare it together, the Yondaime Hokage said. I got to return to work. See you later. With that said, he disappeared in a flash of yellow. With Naruto. After leaving the Uzumaki compound, Naruto entered the village hidden in leaves. Really, being inside the compound did feel as if one was inside another village. Well, it was better that way. They were hidden from the rest of the villagers and things were a lot quieter, unlike with how noisy the streets could be. The obvious cloak of invisibility that Naruto wore as he made his way through the streets wasn't forgotten to his mind. He wasn't ignoring things. He was being attentive, this one time. He did have his moments, but that was beside the point. It was obvious that he still needed to do more than he was doing for the cloak to leave his shoulders. He needed more than what he was doing. He had to do more to be able to leave the shadow of his father. Even so, Naruto wasn't going to compromise anything in order to gain that power that he needed. He wasn't a fool who would be tempted by power. Power given wasn't something that he would be proud. It wasn't something that would get him out of his father's shadow. Naruto wanted to earn his power. He wanted to work himself hard in order to become something else. He wanted to stand proudly at his efforts. Danzo's offer was a little appealing. Perhaps if the man hadn't said he could make him strong and give him power, Naruto would have went along with the man. But he wanted to do something for himself. He wanted to learn his trade, come up with a style that would be unique to him. Given power wasn't what would make his light hit the elemental nations. His own sweat would do so. Progress was there. Naruto could feel it. He could see it. Not a year had passed and he had already improved greatly. What would he become in 2 more years? He would Serta. The sound of a bell ringing cut through Naruto's thoughts. He'd reached his destination, Hisaragi Weapons Shop. As he walked into the shop, Naruto wandered around, looking for what he sought. Kunais of all kinds were at large. But Naruto wasn't going to stalk for them. He was looking for a blade. The redhead passed the kunai section and wandered into a section of swords. He just stood there watching swords of all kinds. The weaponry was simply amazing. Beautiful even. Naruto could see himself owning such a stash inside his room. It's not very often you see someone your age looking at swords with such eyes, a broad voice behind Naruto, who didn't even turn to face the big bearded man who was behind him. There is no one like me, the redhead gave a response, his eyes still staring at the weapons put on display. The man merely chuckled at hearing that. You're certainly right about that. There is only one Uzumaki Naruto, he said, making the redhead turn to face him. Your father is a customer of mine. What can I do for you? I'm looking for a sword. Not short as a kodachi. A katana made of strong chakra-conducive material. Not a material that will break after 2 or 3 times of usage. I want a material that will be hard and not one that will disappoint me, Naruto said. I don't want to end up with a sword that will break easily. If it can be repaired, it will be fine. Hisaragi stared at the redhead for a long minute. It was like he was talking to a seasoned shinobi who wants a weapon that will be good for him in battle. How long exactly? Should it be light or heavy? Should it just be a straight sword? You're the expert. I'm sure you can make something that will be good for me in length, Naruto said. I want something light, straight and double-edged, he paused, tilting his head to the side. When can I expect it? The man laughed for a moment at the question. In a month. I have to order the material, lots of it since it will require repairs. You do know that a weapon like that will cost. Naruto nodded. Price isn't an obstacle, Naruto said before adding. I will return in 3 weeks to check the progress and try out of the samples. We will discuss the payments thereafter. It shall be done, Hisaragi said, holding out his right hand. Naruto took it and the man smiled. I look forward to seeing you more regularly, Uzumaki. Later. Itachi had been almost disappointed when Naruto didn't show up at the academy. This was the day that they'd agreed that they'd walk home together. Their compounds were not that far off each other. The Uzumaki compound was a little away from the village, because of its holding of the Kyuubi and the fact that they liked to keep things hidden within their walls rather than invite other people in to know what was going in. Itachi wasn't bothered by that. He didn't think too deeply about it. He was most concerned by Naruto's no-show. What could have caused this absence? The redhead wasn't the one to miss classes, even though it was obvious he saw it as a waste of time. Their sensei hadn't looked bothered by the absence. It was the fact that made Itachi think perhaps the redhead's absence had been known to the academy. It was possibly something to do with his clan. Naruto was a clan heir, so there were things that he had to do and attend to. Even his father sometimes took him away from the village so that he could learn a few things as the future leader of the Uchiha clan. Still, if the redhead had known about this, he would have told him yesterday. As Itachi reached the gates, he saw Naruto, leaning against the frames, with his hands inside his pockets, and a look that clearly said it was outside the borders of the hidden leaf. The Uchiha shook his head. It was a class look. Naruto wore the same look when he was in class, when the sensei was teaching. Well, he couldn't disagree with the fact that the academy lessons had no benefit to people like them. He was simply going there for formalities. As Itachi reached the redhead, he spoke. I thought I'd just catch you another time, he said, stopping for a moment before Naruto straightened and the two made their way. I said I'd walk with you, Naruto was only willing to say before asking. So, what is the agenda behind this request? You don't look like the one to make friends or that sort. Itachi raised an eyebrow at that. What makes you think that? You don't even observe me to be able to tell. I, on the other hand, can tell that you don't try to make friends as you simply ignore everyone else in class, including the teacher. Naruto smiled. Ah, you watch me a lot, huh? He said. But should you be the one to say? Maybe not, Itachi conceded. What happened? Naruto didn't respond. He was still waiting for Itachi to answer his question. The Uchiha stared at the redhead who appeared as if he hadn't heard him. It took him a couple of seconds to figure it out before he spoke. I do have a friend, Itachi said. And I think we will help each other grow if we got along. We are of the same age group and both in our own level in our generation. We can learn something from each other. Itachi paused for a moment. Plus my father thinks it will be best for me. Naruto didn't respond to that. He answered Itachi's question. There was a meeting with the Hyuga head clan at my compound. And as part of my training I had to be there. The indifference in Naruto's tone just made it obvious to Itachi that the redhead had been there physically, but his mind was somewhere else. Itachi shook his head, and as he did, What his father had said to him came to his mind. There is still some time. What do you say to a sparring session? I wish to understand you a little more. Naruto thought about it for a moment. That is fine, he said. Itachi was honestly surprised that the redhead had agreed. He didn't think he would. Why? Azumi has been bugging me about making a friend, and I think testing myself will tell me how far I have improved. You won't annoy me with things I don't want to hear, and we are in the same position, Naruto explained lightly. There was a slightly shrug of his shoulders though. Why don't you agree to it at the academy? I have my reasons, Naruto said. I haven't run all day. I need a warm up. Follow me to my training ground. That said, Naruto took off. Itachi blinked. He shook his head before following suit.